Good evening, Rockville. Today is December 9th, 2024, meeting number 28-24. I want to invite our esteemed Girl Scout Troop 33371 to join us up front for the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to go down and join them.
My goodness, they're so cute. Ready? We don't bite. It's okay.
They're really nice, I promise. Okay, we're going to turn towards that flag right there.
Yep, right there.
Okay, come this way. Okay. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good job. Thank you. Standing up. I'm just checking if everybody's We'll now proceed to proclamations and recognition. Colleagues, will you join me?
Good evening, Rockville. One of the many things that makes Rockville such a wonderful city is our commitment to and our investment in upholding, respecting, and promoting the human rights of all residents. And so with that in mind, I am honored to present the proclamation for Human Rights Day here in Rockville. So, whereas December 10th marks the 76th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And whereas that declaration establishes multiple rights, such as freedom, equal dignity, peace, and the overall worth of every individual human being. And whereas the theme for Human Rights Day 2024 is equality, reducing inequalities and advancing human rights. Now, therefore, the Mayor and Council of Rockville, Maryland, do hereby proclaim December 10th, 2024 as Human Rights Day in Rockville, and encourages Rockville residents to appreciate the importance of human rights locally and globally, to educate themselves on human rights issues we're facing today, and to advocate for those whose rights are violated. I move the proclamation.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye.
Thank you. And part of our investment in human rights here in Rockville is our Human Rights Commission. So I'd like to invite Rebecca Murphy, Gabrielle Zui, anyone else from the commission to come on up and say a few words, accept the proclamation.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. On behalf of the Human Rights Commission of the City of Rockville, we graciously accept this proclamation from the Mayor and Council. As we celebrate the 76th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we are grateful to live in a city that strives to protect the inalienable human rights of all of its residents.
This day is an important celebration of all the progress we've made to uphold the dignity and safety of all people, and a meaningful reminder of the work ongoing and ahead. We look forward to continuing to work with the city in 2025 to determine Rockville's potential for participation in one or more of the 3 following international city-based programs supported by the United Nations: Human Rights Cities, Cities for CEDAW, and Child-Friendly Cities. Thank you.
Yes.
We'll just encourage it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Habari gani, which means how are you in Swahili, and that is how you start each of the days of Kwanzaa. Whereas Kwanzaa is an annual celebration of African American culture born out of the turbulent civil rights era of the 1960s. And whereas the 7 principal days of Kwanzaa are: Day 1, Umoja, unity. Day 2, Kujichagulia, self-determination, which is my favorite. Day 3, Ujima, collective work and responsibility. Day 4, Ujama, cooperative economics. Day 5, Nia, purpose. Day 6, Kumba, creativity. Day 7, Imani, faith. Now, therefore, the Mayor and Council of Rockville, Maryland, hereby proclaim and observe December 26, 2024 through January 1st, 2025 as Kwanzaa in Rockville, and invite all residents to understand its principles and enjoy the celebration of the first fruits of the year, and to practice the 7 principles all year round. The city encourages everyone to share in this festive season and to spread love to all residents of Rockville and beyond. I move the proclamation.
We have a second. Councilman Fulton. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye. And I would like to invite Miss Anita Powell to come up and accept the proclamation and share some remarks.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to stand before you this evening to accept the 2024 Kwanzaa Proclamation. I hereby accept it on behalf of those who celebrate Kwanzaa and its 7 principles, those who would like to learn more about Kwanzaa and why it is important to celebrate it as a family, as a community, and as a city. Moreover, we thank you for what you are doing in the city of Rockville to recognize our diverse culture and its inclusiveness in the city as a sense of belonging to the city as a whole. Thank you again for allowing me to accept this year's Kwanzaa Proclamation. Can I speak with everybody? That's what we do, right?
Thank you, Miss Anita.
Here, I'll give you
Thank
a
you,
hug.
Miss Anita.
Thank you all for celebrating these proclamations and recognitions. I want to thank Girl Scout Troop 33371. You did a fantastic job. We are so proud of you. Thank you. Right now, we are going to be taking a brief recess during our new process. We'll always meet for proclamations generally at 5:30, and then we'll break until we begin again at 6:30 p.m. for our meeting. There we'll be appointing boards and commissioners, approving our consent items, and then having a detailed conversation about the Rockville Town Center Master Plan. Thanks to all who came out, and we'll see you at 6:30. Good evening, Rockville. Welcome. Today is December 9th, 2024, and we'll begin meeting 28-24. Welcome, Ms. Sarah Taylor Farrell.
Madam Mayor and council members, there are no changes to the agenda this evening. There is a updated remark for the 16th at the end of the agenda.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager Jeff Mihalik.
Mayor Ashland, members of City Council, good evening. I know we have a long work session tonight, so I just have a couple of announcements really quick, and they're both good news. This past Wednesday, the Rockville Police Department partnered with various police agencies in conducting a large-scale traffic and pedestrian safety initiative along all of Route 355 from the DC line all the way to the Frederick County line. City personnel focused their efforts on the segment inside the Rockville city limits. This is a really important initiative. It was great to see all of our agencies partnering together, and it clearly aligns with your goal of Rockville's Vision Zero campaign. So we're excited to participate with that initiative. Secondarily, later on this evening, you'll consider the annual comprehensive financial report. In summary, the city is in excellent financial position. Some of the highlights include the fund balance in the general fund increased over the past year by $5.8 million. And the city's government-wide financial position experienced a net increase of $14.8 million. All governmental funds ended the year with a positive fund balance. There were no significant financial issues of concern identified by auditors, and there were no identified material weaknesses in the city's internal controls. So all fantastic news. A lot of cities cannot have that same report, so we're very fortunate here. So congratulations to the City Council, all of city staff who are excellent stewards of these public funds. That's all I have to report, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great news. I know there's a lot of concern that we're hearing about budgets, especially between the federal and state. And I know our leaders are working very, very hard to make sure that Maryland and Rockville and the county council are in good shape. Does anyone have any questions for our city manager? Okay, thank you very much. We have several appointments for boards and commissions, and we'll be approving new appointments for the Cultural Arts Commission, the Community Policing Advisory Commission, the Education Commission, the Human Services Advisory Commission, the Landlord Tenant Commission, Recreation and Parks Advisory Board, Transportation and Mobility Commission. Colleagues, can we begin with the Cultural Arts Commission? Councilmember Van Grack.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve the new appointment of Susan Hoffman to the Cultural Arts Commission to serve a full 3-year term till December 1st, 2027.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Great. It is unanimous. We now have the Community Policing Advisory Commission. Councilmember Valeri.
So we have 4, but I think that I can combine them and still keep the relevant data. I move to approve the new appointment of Lawrence Center to the Community Policing Advisory Board to serve a full 3-year term until December 1st, 2027. Scott Moore to serve a full 3-year term until December 1st, 2027. New appointment of Kenneth Sheng to serve a full 3-year term as an alternate until December 1st, 2027. And Robin Prather to serve a full 3-year term until February 1st, 2027.
Do we have a second? Councilmember Fulton seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
It is unanimous. We'll now move to the Education Commission. Dr. Miles, do you want to do that one?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move to nominate Sean Liu for a new appointment to serve a full 2-year term as private school parent representative until December 1st, 2026.
Do we have a second? Councilmember Shaw seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All right. Next, we have the Human Services Advisory Commission. Councilmember Van Greg.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve the reappointment of Ricky Mui to the Human Services Advisory Commission to serve a 3-year term until September 1, 2027.
Do we have a second? Second. Councilmember Jackson seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Next, we have Landlord Tenants Commission. Councilmember Shaw.
I move to approve the new appointment of Kaylin Salisbury Fong to Landlord Tenant Affairs Commission to serve a full 3-year term until December 1st, 2027.
Do we have a second? Councilmember Larry seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Next, we have the Recreation and Parks Advisory Board. Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the reappointment of Thomas Lynch to the Recreation and Parks Advisory Board to serve a full 3-year term until September 1st, 2027.
Do we have a second? Councilmember Fulton seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. It's unanimous. Okay. Next is the Transportation and Mobility Commission. Councilmember Valeri.
I move to approve the new appointment of Gerald Kishi to the Transportation Mobility Commission to serve a full 3-year term until December 1st, 2027.
Councilmember Shaw seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Okay. We're done. We are done. All right. Now we'd like to open up for community forum. This is a chance for the mayor and council to listen to our residents and stakeholders. Please address the mayor and council and speak in a civil and courteous manner to the mayor and council and members of the audience. Be respectful of each other. Each person is allowed 3 minutes. There's a clock up front where you can watch your time. You will also hear an audible beep that will be at the end of your 3 minutes. Please state your name and whether you live in the city of Rockville for the record. And the mayor and council and city and staff allocate time for meeting agendas, providing sufficient time. So I have a few people who have signed up in advance on this list. However, if there's anyone who would like to speak afterwards, please feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you. First, I'd like to welcome Rob Gilroy. Welcome.
I would like to know what could be done to repeal the East Rockville guidelines.
We will hear testimony at this time, and then just so you know, we're listening at this point. If you could share what you're
Sure. So there's a lot of things with the East Rockville guidelines that I don't think were shared with the community in East Rockville. And I don't think there's a big enough turnout of the property owners in East Rockville to understand what exactly these guidelines really mean to them as property owners. The cost to owners in East Rockville to do improvements to their homes becomes a lot more expensive based on the guidelines. And I think the guidelines themselves don't adequately reflect the property sizes in East Rockville. The lots over in East Rockville are very small, and the guidelines are based on, or appear to be based on, a much larger lot that would give you the ability to make some of the improvements that are required by the East Rockville guidelines. I think it's like disenfranchising the property owners of East Rockville, putting a burden on them of a lot of additional costs, and if they want to appeal the process of the guidelines, it's very lengthy, it's very involved. You basically have, put a covenants on a property that if you bought a property in East Rockville prior to the approval of these Rockville guidelines, you kind of got stuck, you know. So you might have bought a piece of property over there, and then the guidelines were enacted, and now you can't make the improvements, or you can't afford to make the improvements that are necessary based on your existing house. The roof line, the architectural features, there's just a ton of things that you know, just don't work. And it's going to cost people a lot of money, or they won't be able to do the improvements to their homes. West Rockville shot it down. They had the same process in West Rockville. The community got together. West Rockville is a lot more affluent than East Rockville, and they were able to stop it. So there's no covenant in West Rockville. There's a covenant in East Rockville, and just portions of East Rockville. So it's just the East Rockville just to the east of the metro station. I don't think it's fair, and I don't think people were adequately notified of really what it meant or what it was going to do to their property, and what do we have to do to repeal this thing, just get rid of it, just like it never happened in West Rockville.
Thank you. I just want to note that there will be a member at the back when you exit, so that staff can tell you how to share additional feedback and how to engage. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your testimony.
How can that move forward?
A member of staff will meet you at the back.
I appreciate that. All right, thank you.
Take care. Thank you. I'd like to next welcome Isaac Furby. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Isaac Berry, and I do live in the city of Rockville. I did write a little statement today. My name is Isaac Berry, and I stand before you as a resident of Rockville, and I'm a newly evicted tenant from the apartment complex Parkside Landing Apartments. I want to begin by referencing to you, Madam Mayor, said during the housing strategy meeting on October 21st of this year. And I do have an audio clip that I do want to play for you. That way we're on the same accord.
Montgomery County together to make sure that Rockville was included to be able to receive opportunities for right of first refusal and to collaborate with our partner Rockville Housing Enterprise. That helped us to save Parkside Landing as well as Scarborough, and those were maintained and even made more affordable.
Okay, so with that being said, I did want to bring a few concerns about the Parkside Landing establishment. I would like to share with you pretty much I would like to have an optimistic point of view on it. But as somebody who has lived in the Parkside Landing community with daily struggles, I can say that I'm certainly that the word so far that I have, the reality that I face so far with Parkside is neither well-maintained nor affordable. And as you said in that video, that Parkside Landing was one of the communities that was made more affordable, and it's not. At Parkside, residents endure ongoing hazardous issues and living conditions such as mice, rats, roaches, black mold infestation in all of the HVAC systems. These are just a few of the severe issues that we've repeatedly brought to the attention of management, but yet instead of addressing the concerns or hearing our pleas, we've been ignored, ridiculed, and we have turned to the courts for help. They've dismissed our cases and seemingly or deemed our situation insignificantly urgent and collective rent escrow. Along with many of the neighbors, I firmly believe that the property manager has acted in bad faith. They have manipulated documents and operated this property with blatant disregard for both the law and the well-being of its tenants. Their actions have been very unprofessional and at times outright disrespectful towards me and my fellow residents. We deserve better. We deserve a safe, habitable, and dignified home. Our voices should be heard and our rights should be respected. That's why we turn to CASA and Miss Councilwoman Shaw, and who have supported us or provided us legal representation and have helped us hold the management accountable. I implore to the city of Rockville to take a swift action and call to revoke Parkside Landing's management or management license, they're prioritizing profits over compliance with basic health or with disregard for basic health and safety codes. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you for sharing your experience. Welcome, Corey M.
Good evening. My name is Corey Moore, and I've lived at Parkside Landing since April 2022. I live here with my wife and 2 children, and like many others, I am a working class individual just trying to keep up with the rising cost of living. I'm here today to address a critical failure on the part of Rockville, a failure that has directly impacted my family and countless others living at Parkside Landing. The city's failure to thoroughly inspect the units at Parkside Landing following up on citations is deeply concerning. I have had a hard time believing that any city inspector would allow this management company to continue operating upon seeing the conditions that many of us has lived in. Yet, we have seen little to no action taken. What makes this even worse is that when residents have reached out to the city, we've been told that only one inspector handles inspections. As a result, many units have not even been cited or properly inspected. This is unacceptable.
I have them, but when I looked up, I said it wasn't necessarily any of those coupons because sometimes like Tuesday is whatever day. You know. No, you like me.
I apologize. Keep going. I don't know. Someone may be speaking that shouldn't be.
I also want to speak out on the rent. So this is unacceptable. If the city cannot properly enforce its own standards, how can we expect these issues to be resolved? I also want to speak out on the issues of rent increases, along with many other residents. I am deeply concerned about the unaffordability of living here. Parkside Landing is simply not affordable for working class families like mine. Many of us have urged the city council to place a rent cap to prevent further displacement, yet we have been ignored time and time again. It feels as though this body doesn't care that you are fine with the displacement of families like mine. In response to our voices not being heard, we held a press conference with CASA to raise awareness of our struggles. We will continue to speak out and fight until the city takes action and holds the management company at Parkside Landing accountable for the way we've been treated. I urge the city of Rockville to take immediate action to address these issues. We need better oversight and enforcement of housing codes, and we need leadership willing to stand up for the working class families who are being left behind. Also, find it unfair that we have to pay rent on time, but when we ask for stuff to get fixed on time, it's always a problem. And thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Juan Z.
Hello.
Welcome.
How y'all doing? My name is Juan Zimmerman. I'm a resident here in Rockville. I actually live at Parkside Landing. I actually was a maintenance man of Parkside Landing for wind management companies. So I'm supporting all of the tenants that was dealing with the landlord issues. Even myself, I will agree with my fellow residents that it's very, very bad conditions for us to be living in and dealing with the rent and everything. Due to the fact that I was actually the maintenance man there last year where I left with the management company due to the unfairness towards the employee, which would be me, on the behalf of multiple reasons as far as compensation and just me being there majority by myself as a maintenance man, clearing and doing, like over-exonerating myself to, help out these tenants and making sure that the property is upkept well. So when Mr. Moore, the camelback on what he said, it takes time for them to actually get around to fix things. Like I'm currently dealing with a situation with 3 buildings that went out over the course of last weekend. We don't have any heat. We didn't have hot water until I fixed it. The maintenance didn't come out and fix it. And as well as though many other situations that I have dealt with me living here in Rockville, I'm also a business owner, which I had went through a portion where I got scammed and lost a lot. So at this point, I'm just trying to, work my way out and show support to all of the tenants there and just find some type of justice, just not for myself and my daughter, because I'm a single father. My daughter goes to Julius West Middle School, as well as though she, knows other children that's living on the property as well. And pretty much a lot of the units have similar problems and similar issues, which I wish I could fix, but I'm only a one man.
Thank you. Can you clarify, you a resident of Parkside Landing as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
No
Appreciate
problem.
it.
Thank you.
Welcome, Nicole R.
How are you? My name is Nicole Romalo. I actually reside at Parkside Landing. Parkside Landing is supposed to be an affordable housing, but $2,300 is not affordable when you live with mice, mold, roaches, falling ceilings. There's no security whatsoever in the building. If you want a fob to enter the building, they charge you for it, but you can literally just pull the doors. They don't fix it. They don't care to fix it. I went from March all the way to the last week of August with no AC. Every time I asked them, when is it going to be fixed, they kept telling me, oh, next week, next week. Then they kept giving me the excuse that it was 10 other apartments without AC. My son was hospitalized with respiratory issues because the apartment was 108 degrees. They didn't help me. Now I got a $2,000 doctor bill that they just don't care about. When it was brought up in court, they thought it was funny. They laughed at the situation when I said my son was hospitalized because of their conditions. There's mice, there's rats, mold. The management is just, it doesn't matter, the old, new. I mean, in a couple of months, they switched the property manager 3-4 times already. They laugh about our situations. They honestly do not care. One of my old neighbors that moved out maybe 2 months ago, she was a wild one. She threatened my kids' lives and said that she was going to kill them. When I went to the property manager that they fired, she told me, tell them to try it instead of doing what they had to do. They literally bothered every single tenant in that building, in the next building. It didn't matter what building it was. They knew exactly who they were. And at court, when we did bring up, when a lot of the tenants tried to explain what was going on, the judge actually turned to a couple of them and called them crazy, called them liars, and his excuse was, oh, I lived at Parkside Landing a long time ago. But I mean, I just think it's unfair that you want us to pay $2,300 or more in rent, but we're living with mice, we're living with molds, washers that don't work, dryers that don't work, air conditioning, heat does not work. Kids are getting sick, adults are getting sick. My mom also has breathing issues, and every time she's over, she cannot breathe. My son has horrible respiratory issues now because of the mold in the apartments. And management just does not care. When you try to get something fixed, maintenance always makes up an excuse of, oh, we have to order a part. When I did not have AC, they told me in March they had to order a part. In August, when they came after I sent an email, they said they had to order that same exact part. Come to find out, it was they were trying to get a warranty and they couldn't afford the people that did have a warranty. So we went months with no AC, and now we have no heat also. And when you put in a request, they just cancel it. They don't fix anything. Thank you.
Melissa R. He can come with you if you'd like. Yeah. All ages are welcome.
Good evening. My name is Melissa Romalo. I lived at Parkside Landing since February of 2024. I live directly under the leasing office. It has been nothing but disaster. My son has a chronic cough that doesn't go away. Every 3 weeks is a different antibiotic. My mom is the same way. Nicole is my sister. We live in opposite buildings. Since I moved in, all doors of the closets fell off. And in the courthouse, Iman and Cleon had the nerve to say that it was because of my son. My son wasn't even with me when me, my mother, and my sister did the walkthrough of the apartment. It was just 3 adults walking the unit, opening the doors, and they literally fell on you. Luckily, he wasn't with me. But it's kind of ridiculous that you blame a 2-year-old. Even if it was him, the door shouldn't fall on you like that. The roaches, there's roaches everywhere. It doesn't matter day, night, they're everywhere. Doesn't matter how many times they come out to exterminate, they're there. They came out, I want to say 3 weeks ago before my court date. And now the roaches have gone, it's okay, puppy. The roaches have gone from the kitchen into my bedroom because all they did was spray the kitchen, not the bathroom, not the bedrooms. I have a 2-bedroom apartment. All they did was the kitchen floor. And I have a video, all you see is directly just around. They made me remove everything from the cabinets and to do nothing. Now I have mice. I literally was fighting with one Saturday at 3:30 in the morning. And now there's another one. And it's kind of ridiculous. They don't do anything. You call them and, yeah, we'll be out, and they don't show up. I have mold in all my vents. I've told them, and they said it was dirt. I called, I want to say when I first moved in, because my mom's asthma was really bad, they were going to come out, and they never did. September 3rd came around, they came. The filter was disintegrating from the mold. October 20 or October 30th, because it was my mom's birthday, they came again, and that second one was already molding. So they replaced it right before court. Of course, the judge laughed and said I was a liar and that I was crazy, even with all my evidence. Parkside Landing is not a good place to live. They're not affordable. There's no reason I should be paying $1,900 to live with mice, roaches, mold, and then a neighbor that threatens to kill my niece and nephew. And because she antagonizes me from her balcony, I get a lease violation. Because we had the press conference last week, I got a violation. Because we speak our mind, that's not fair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Grant Sams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council, again, for the opportunity to address you. And I also want to direct a thank you to the city staff who've done an incredible job over the past 6 months at researching the housing stability and crisis issue that we're trying to address with this bill. I wanted to address a aspect of this that I haven't seen discussed yet. There's been a lot of talk about how the problem of rent affordability is primarily driven by the lack of supply, and that if we have more supply, the price will go down. However, those opinions and views don't always account for the fact that sometimes markets fail. And in this case, markets have failed. Chuck Marone of the urbanist nonprofit Strong Towns explains a situation caused by the securitization and trading of mortgage-backed securities in large apartment buildings. And to sort of put it in plain English, once you build a building is an asset. When you get, or is an asset, and the value of that asset is tied to the rent that it is expected to bring in. So if the rent declines, the value of that asset is less. The result is that very often, because having an asset that has declined in value would have negative impacts going for rolling over their loans, very often landlords and developers will opt to instead keep units vacant at the same rate, hoping the market catches up and improves. And oftentimes, banks won't call them out on this because they're financially incentivized to sell the loan or to close the loan so that they can sell it and roll it over. This sometimes works, but it can sometimes cause collapse. Occupancies in some buildings within the US that have been foreclosed on in the last 6 months have had occupancy rates of 60%, and rents did not decrease. In that case, plenty of supply, demand didn't go down. Plenty of supply and cost didn't go down. I've seen this in my own building. We actually have a fee that's tied to the occupancy of our building. And as rents surge and as more people were taken to eviction court from my building, that occupancy-based fee tripled, which means there was a significant amount of units that were vacant, and we are still not back to that level before COVID. I just want to emphasize the point that when we talk about supply and demand aren't always strictly correlated here. And there are new studies that show that rent stabilization is very effective at protecting renters and keeping them in their homes without negatively impacting new housing starts or other kinds of supply issues. So I want to urge you once again, please support rent stabilization.
Thank you for your testimony. That exhausts the list of those who have signed up in advance. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Welcome. I should also note there will be a separate public hearing on Town Center. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. I would like to make a few comments about the Town Center project. In particular,
Can I ask you a question? Do you want to do that as part of community forum or as part of the public hearing for Town Center?
I would prefer to do that at this point,
okay,
if you don't mind. Personally, I have a disability, and I had mentioned at one of the open meetings, there is presently no provision in the proposals for parking for disabled handicapped people. And from the location of where these buildings are, the nearest public parking is clearly too far to walk. It's just not possible for somebody to be in that kind of building with no parking available. That may or may not be impacted by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I think that staff were investigating that. A second problem is that typically the buildings in this transition area that people are talking about are sold rather than rented. And when someone buys an apartment, they can't really appreciate what the difficulties are going to be with parking. So the price of the unit is not going to reflect that. On the other hand, if people are renting, they can pretty quickly decide, do they need a car, where it's possible to park, and so on. And the rental pricing is going to adjust according to whether parking is available or not. But if somebody buys a property, moving out and selling that property because parking has just become too much of a problem is really difficult and expensive. So it may be worthwhile thinking about imposing some constraints on buildings that have no parking and say you have to have some way of reflecting that within it. The third point that I would like to make is regarding the bonus height that is being proposed. I'd like to suggest that bonus height should only be available to buildings that actually do have parking. And if developers want to reap the benefit of the bonus height incentives, it's up to them to provide a certain amount, not necessarily the amount that has been there in the past, but need to provide a certain amount of parking available, especially for people who are handicapped. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. I wanted to...
And I do live in the city of Rockville in Rose Hill Falls.
Thank you. Welcome. Is there anyone else who would like to speak as part of community forum? We will have the public hearing later. Okay. Mr. City Manager, I wanted to, just because some of these are time-sensitive issues, to just make sure that someone from staff is available in the back if people want to, if they haven't already filed landlord-tenant complaints, find out how to do that. I will note that, as noted in the comments that were played on audio, that Parkside Landing and Scarborough were both purchased through right of first refusals. Those are owned by Rockville Housing Enterprise, not the city. However, the city does need to and make sure that there are proper inspections in those buildings. So if the mayor and council could just get an update. I think you said sent something with us earlier, but on where we are in terms of inspections and violations for Parkside Landing.
Happy to do that.
Okay. And then just for the public's awareness, I personally requested a meeting with RHE to discuss some of the concerns that have been raised, and I hope to meet with some folks to find out more about what's going on. Councilmember Shaw.
I just also wanted to note that I'm also really disappointed in terms of the conditions. And I wanted to thank CASA for giving me and several of the tenants for giving me a tour of their home. And I will also be at that meeting.
Thank you for everyone who came out. We'll definitely work with staff to find out more and get to the bottom of this. Thank you. I would like to see if Mr. Matite can meet with you at the back to get more detail and to be able to respond to your question. Is that okay? All right. Councilman Valeri.
Super quickly, in any way that we assist the residents of Parkside Landing that came out, and thank you, by the way, for doing that. It's not easy, especially with little people. I remember those days. Would it be appropriate to ask to capture as much of the information and the details as have been shared here, but in addition to that? I sometimes feel a little bit firewalled from knowing exactly the extent. So I would like to know things like how long have certain buildings not had heat? I would like to know how long certain buildings did not have AC during, yet again, one of the hottest summers. These things are really distressing. As much detail as we can get from these fine people while they're here would be helpful.
Thank you. And I did send Mr. Matite go to the back. So thank you for coming to share your stories. Really appreciate it. Okay. All right. We'll now be moving on to agenda item number 9, consent agenda item. There are items A through D. The FY24 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, Internal Control Letter, as well as the Popular Annual Financial Report. That is something that has very good information and details for the public. It's posted on our website as well as in this agenda book on where we stand financially. Letter B is award and authorize the city manager or designee to execute a contract in the form of a master agreement to Mansfield Energy Corp. To support the purchase of diesel fuel for our facilities and vehicles in Rockville. The next is a approval and submission to Montgomery County of the City of Rockville funding application for the Community Development Block Grant. You can see how we're helping some nonprofits to help maintain properties. D, letter of support to the Maryland Public Service Commission for PEPCO's electric vehicle Phase 2 programs. Does anyone have any questions, or are you willing to take all 4, all A through D? Councilmember Shaw.
Just a quick comment of gratitude for staff. I think that this is the first year for the Popular Annual Financial Report to include the percentage of renters, and I think that is really critically important for several reasons. One, renters pay taxes through our rent. So as property taxes increase, our rent also increases. Two, multifamily apartment properties comprise about 50.2% of the city's commercial inventory, which is funded from renters' salaries and wages of thousands of Rockville renters. And then also, considering that 56% of renters are cost burden, renters are making tremendous sacrifices to our economy in terms of having to pay high levels of rent in addition to local expenses. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve consent agenda items A, B, C, and D as you've described and as presented this evening.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Councilmember Shaw seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. There was just one comment I'll make at the end is just, I know some folks applied to the Community Development Block Grant that were not successful this time. It was their first time applying. I'm hopeful that staff will meet with that applicant and decide if there are other grants that might be appropriate, and also give feedback so that people can continue to improve their applications.
We will do that. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, and then this last thing is I would like to make sure that we are getting updates, because I saw that you added $25,000 to the single family home program. And I just want to make sure that if we're not using that, that we put that back into the nonprofit support. I don't know if anyone, okay, all right. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to our public hearing on the Town Center Master Plan. City Clerk, has this been properly noticed?
Madam Mayor and council members, it has been properly noticed. It was noticed in the Washington Post on Thursday, November 21st, and Thursday, November 28th, and also on our city's website.
Thank you very much. We will allow folks to proceed. I'll call those who have signed up in advance, and if those who want to speak after, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you. All persons addressing the mayor and council shall speak in a civil and courteous manner, and members of the audience shall be respectful of others. Each individual will be allowed 3 minutes to speak, and organization groups representing community members can speak for 5 minutes. We ask that you stick to the time allowed. There will be a time clock in front of you, and you will hear an audible beep at the end of your time. Please state your name and if you live in Rockville for the record. With that, welcome Steve Van Grack.
Good evening, members of the Mayor and Council. Always a delight to be here. Steve Van Grack, and I live in the city of Rockville. I have appeared before prior mayor and councils many times on the issue of the town center, and in each instance, probably for the last 30 years, it's been critical of the actions of the mayor and council. Tonight is different. I do want to tell you that when I was mayor, we had a thing called Rockville Mall. And Rockville Mall was part of a project in 1973 called Rockville Town Center. So I don't want Rockville Town Center's name to cause any problems. But tonight, I want to appear before you in a very positive way, letting you know that the 2024 Rockville Town Center Master Plan that was approved by the Planning Commission is the finest document I have seen on the Rockville Town Center. I commend the city staff. The city staff did the most extensive outreach program that I'm aware of, maybe forever. They provided great information to the Planning Commission. I also want to commend the Planning Commission. They thoroughly reviewed it and they came up with great recommendations. I would like to spend some time, but I'm not going to, telling you about the great parts of this plan. I just want you to approve it. Much more housing, affordable workforce housing, reduction of parking requirements, expedited approval process, better signage, more events. But the most important sentence from that whole report says, where people can live, work, and play for years to come. The real reasons that I'm here is not only to thank those who have done it, it's to encourage you to vote for it and approve it. But there are some suggestions I'd like to present to you. You should make or seek to make the town center the safest it can be. Security cameras should be all over. There should be signs for security cameras. There should even be a volunteer public safety officers. The previous chief of police thought all these were good ideas. There should be incentives to office building owners to redevelop with affordable housing. There should be an organization of the property, the landowners, to form a business government improvement district. And I think that the city should bring together the major interested parties together for future planning. Could be Montgomery County government, could be Montgomery College, could be the courthouses, could be WMATA, could be the Rockville Volunteer Fire Department. There should be one entity that works on the future. But the most important thing that I share with you tonight is I have lived and worked in Rockville for almost 50 years. And this is the best plan that has been presented for the Rockville Town Center in that time period. Thank you all.
Thank you. Well, I know that Philip Stubbs spoke already. Ms. Taylor Farrell, can we just make sure that his comments are included in this public hearing? Okay.
Sure.
Oh, did you not speak? Sorry. All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
I was like, I don't know him.
There's another Philip, sorry. Welcome. Yes.
Thank you, Mayor, council members, and staff for this opportunity to testify. I'm Phil Stout, as you've already said. My wife and I have lived on Upton Street in the West End for the past 7 years. We love walking and riding for all of our commuting, shopping, and dining, as do our neighbors. The master plan should be tailored to and is tailored to town center's strengths: proximity to transit, community, and families. Town center has something other developing communities don't. It is adjacent to Metro Rail and Bus, MARC, and Amtrak. The master plan presents a more welcoming station and a better connection to town center, a win-win for visitors and residents alike. Rockville is community-oriented. Town center is bordered by largely single-family neighborhoods. This is both a boon. We enjoy our green neighborhoods and seeing each other a lot, and a bust. We lack the housing to match our enviable location. The master plan gets this. It recognizes that development around town square won't be enough. It cleverly uses limited space to provide adequate housing while limiting impact on existing housing. In another step toward appropriate housing density, the master plan encourages affordable housing through measures like bonus height. Yes, if this comes to pass, we will see these buildings from our front yard. We welcome it. We want to share our great community and be consistent with our values of diversity and sustainability. In the same vein, we welcome the proposed missing middle housing, and we hope the final plan will go even further toward encouraging that type of development. Another town center strength is being family friendly. For instance, it offers programs at VisArts, the Science Center, the library. The master plan sees this. It encourages the most reliable town center users, neighborhood residents, by having safe ways to walk and ride into town. It builds on the wonderful recent bike lanes and traffic calming measures. The master plan also helps us move away from car culture by right-sizing parking. It allows developers more control over parking and will help future-proof Rockville by adding useful development space. Town center's ideal location will not be a secret forever. It will grow with or without a master plan. We much rather have a town center with a vibrant street life and transit than one clogged with cars going nowhere. We hope the master plan remains at least as bold
Thank you.
and forward-thinking as it is now.
Thank you very much. That exhausts the list of those who have signed up in advance. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Welcome.
Hi, this is Misha Clive. I'm a Rockville resident and a resident of Town Square. I love Rockville Town Center. It is what brought me to live here after a difficult experience with a corporate landlord in Silver Spring. And I absolutely love this place. I feel that it's the hidden gem of Montgomery County and would love for it to become unhidden. So I just wanted to share to the point that Mr. Van Grack was making about going forward in the future of Rockville Town Center. We're talking about future ongoing organized stakeholders to continue to invest in Town Center over the years, that renters and folks who live here absolutely have to be key stakeholders in that. So we'd want to make sure that folks who live here are represented along with businesses and other stakeholders in the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Thank you. To our staff leads here, I wanted to just ask, and if you could clarify to the public, how long comments will be accepted so that they're aware of when they can continue to send emails through.
So we don't have an official closing date at this point. Staff's recommendation is that we keep the record open until the date of adoption of the plan, which is currently scheduled for January 13th.
Team, are you okay with that? I support that as well. Thank you. Great. All right, so we will now end this public hearing. But please feel free to send your comments in to staff and to the mayor and council. We'll now be moving on to our work session and Town Center Master Plan, including the Rockville Metro Station final report. I know that you also have a highlights on what are the things that have changed, just so the listening public can see what has changed from the versions that were previously shared with the public, and we look forward to your presentation. Welcome, Katie Gerbis. Are you going to be the one leading the presentation?
Yes, I will be. Give us just 1 second here to pull this up.
And I just want to acknowledge city panelists and staff, Andrew Reidelbach, Jim Waslick, Ricky Barker, and Jenny Snap.
Sorry, we just need 1 moment. It's giving us a different window than normal.
No problem. If you need more time, we can take a break. We'll just take a 3-minute break. How about that? Is that okay? All right. Good evening, Rockville. Today is still December 9th, 2024. We'll reconvene meeting 28-24. We're moving on to the work session, and we welcome Katie Gerbis. And I know that you have your team of panelists with you, Andrew Reidelbach, Jim Waslick, Ricky Barker, and Jenny Snap. We look forward to hearing an update on the Town Center Master Plan, as well as the Rockville Metro Station final report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we have quite a deck to share with you today. We're going to structure this conversation a little bit different than some of your past work sessions have been structured. How we're going to start it off is we're going to go through all of the slides pretty quickly, all at once at the beginning, and then we're going to come back. We're going to show you all those slides again, and we'd like to go in chunks. So we have several questions we're going to ask you. We'll show you the 2 or 3 slides related to that question. We'll show you the question, staff's recommendation, and then we'd like the group to discuss it and provide some direction to staff, and we'll continue through our list of, I think it's 9 different questions in that way. So a little different than what we're used to, but hopefully it makes it so we can talk about one topic to completion before we move on to the next.
Thank you. Can I ask one clarifying question? Some of us have page number questions as well. I'm thinking, would you like us to wait till the end and maybe even, I know that we talked about having another work session. If there's not enough time, we can bring those specific edits up later.
Yep, that would be great. And we have a copy of the plan so we can pull up the page number.
Excellent.
When
Thank
it's
you.
time. All right, so moving on, kind of talked about this. We're going to do an overview, then we're going to do several different discussions before we come back at the very end to get your feedback. And these areas of discussion that we're going to speak about tonight, area visions and focus areas, housing goals, metro station concept, and base building heights. Those 4 are what we consider kind of key components to the land use chapter of the plan. Some of these we've had a lot of folks give public comment on. Others we've had really no one give public comment on, but they are important components, so we want to make sure that this body is in alignment with what the plan recommends. We're going to talk about the bonus height program and parking requirements. Those are 2 areas, probably the biggest changes that happen throughout the planning commission process. So we're going to talk about those changes, get the body's opinion on those, as well as bus rapid transit, parks and community facilities, and a few other edits that staff would like to bring up for this body to consider. So moving into our requested feedback, as I mentioned earlier, we have 9 total questions we're hoping that we can discuss and come to answers on. So those being questions such as, what is the appropriate housing unit goal for the plan? It's currently at 2,000. Continued support for the concept plan for the Rockville Metro Station. Quite a few questions that are tied to height, both the base height and the bonus height. We'd like to talk about parking minimums. A few areas that we would like to modify to the BRT station section of the plan. Some parks items, specifically staff are proposing adding an additional park to the plan, as well as a few other largely clerical staff edits. So going into the confirmation of those key components, The plan sets forth several different area visions. So you can see we've taken the planning area 1 boundary, we've kind of divided it into different areas, largely based on geography, but more so based on the character. And within the plan, we set forth pretty high level and aspirational goals for each of these areas, knowing that we're going to treat the area where the metro station is differently than we're going to treat the area at the very northern tip of the town center. We also identify several focus areas. So these are going to be much more specific and granular than those area visions. These are specific properties that we feel have the potential for really high impact transformation. So within those focus area elements of the plan, we talk about those exact properties, what we envision could happen on those properties, how we think we can maximize those properties. One of the larger elements in the plan is housing. Right now, the plan proposes a goal of 2,000 net new residential housing units by 2040. That's within the planning area 1 boundary, which, as a reminder, that's 0.4 square miles. So we're talking less than a half square mile here. The plan proposes hitting this 2,000 net new goal by streamlining our regulatory processes, increasing building height, establishing a bonus height program, providing flexibility in adaptive reuse cases, as well as incentives for affordable housing development. The metro station concept is a big part of this plan. This graph or this image should not be foreign to you all. Back in May, this body decided to endorse what was known then as Concept 1. It's now just the concept for the eventual redevelopment of the Rockville metro station. This concept is only redeveloping on WMATA-owned property. Some of the other concepts that were in consideration involved private property. So this concept is just looking at the metro station area, and very high-level conceptual plans anticipate you could probably get close to 2,000 residential units on there. There's plans for a train hall, some park space, accommodated bus loops, kiss and ride, thing of that nature. There are 2 really important elements when we talk about the Metro Concept Study that I think is important to reiterate before this body at this time. First is that the planning area boundaries are the train tracks. So only what you see on this diagram that is west of the train track would be within the planning area and achieved by this plan. So those that you see on the east side, on the East Rockville side, that's not within our planning area. We're still endorsing the concept as a whole, right? Because it's all the metro station property. But we've had some questions about, well, how do we get to that 2,000 unit goal when this right here is saying 1,100 units? It's because not all of that is going to be within the planning area. It's also important when we talk about this to keep in mind that this is still a very, very high-level concept. We don't have a development partner in hand. There has been no actual proposal. All of this is kind of subject to change. It was more of an exercise in space planning to see what could happen here if the conditions were right. It's not a guarantee that things are going to look exactly like they do here. As a part of that discussion in May, you all also elected to endorse an add-on option to address the pedestrian bridge. So the way that WMATA's funding structure is kind of set up in their policy, they will make capital improvements to transit, but they don't make capital improvements to ancillary things such as a bridge. Even though you could argue that's used for transportation, that's within their policy. So if this body did want to add on this bridge option, extend it over the tracks to kind of get rid of the up and down that you have to do right now, where you have to go downstairs, go through, and then you have to go back upstairs, that would be, on the city's dollar. And there are a couple different options here that concept you all endorsed in May would allow. Back in May, when that concept was endorsed, you tasked staff with getting feedback from the general public, trying to understand, are people in agreement with this? And over like zealous, yes. Every single person that we've talked to is like, absolutely, this is common sense. We need to do this. We need to do this now. When can we have it happen? So we take that as a really positive sign. Base building height. So you've seen the map that's on the left or the right of the screen here before, but this chart shows the difference in the base building heights in the April draft, which was the first draft released by staff, and the September draft, which is the one that is endorsed by the Planning Commission. From now on, whenever you hear April, that's that first one. September, that's the Planning Commission approved draft. You can see that the base building heights have actually not changed in any of those areas. The core retains its 200 feet recommendation. The edge is 75 feet. What is new between April and September is the addition of the transition character area. Right now, the current draft has that at 75 feet. Before the transition area existed, that was the edge, which also had a base building height of 75 feet. So the base building heights have not changed between drafts. Now moving into our changes from the Planning Commission, bonus height is something that has changed pretty significantly. So in the April draft, there was only one way to get additional bonus height, and that was by providing 5% or more MPDUs or some other deed restricted affordable housing. If you do that, you get the height. If you don't get the height. Kind of a yes or no, not a lot of gray area there. Through the Planning Commission process, they've added and kind of created a menu of options here. So that 5% additional MPDU requirement is still there, and or 5% additional open public use space that has been greened in some way for climate resiliency features. So the Planning Commission's thought there was affordable housing is absolutely important, yes, but we're also in an urban environment. We have climate action plan goals. We know urban heat island effects tend to take place in areas that are lots of concrete, lots of impervious surface like town center. So they wanted to see that incentivized as well. By adding that in, the calculation for the bonus height has shifted quite a bit. So for the core, the way it's currently drafted is if you provide 5% additional MPDUs, you get 35 feet of height. If you provide that additional 5% green space, you get 15 feet of height. If you do both, you can add them together and you get that maximum of 50. So you can choose to do one or you could choose to do both. For the edge, similar where you get more of your height from the MPDU, so 15 feet there, 10 feet for green space with a maximum of 25 feet. And then in the transition area, that's going to be the same as the core. So that's the 35 feet for MPDUs, 15 feet for green space, a maximum total of 50. In total, you can see on this chart how the maximum height through the bonus height program has shifted over time. So the core has remained the same. It's been 50 through and through. The edge was originally proposed in April as 20 feet. It is now proposed as 25 feet for an increase of 5 feet. And then the area where you see the biggest change is in the transition. As I mentioned earlier, what is now the transition was previously the edge. So in April, that area would have been 20 feet of bonus height. It is now up to 50 feet maximum bonus height. Parking requirements are another thing we've had lots of members of our community share their opinions on over the last several months. So in the April draft, our proposal was to eliminate minimum parking requirements within the planning area for properties that are within half a mile from the metro station or a quarter mile from a bus rapid transit station. This is the same as the regulations that are currently on the books in Montgomery County. Through the Planning Commission process, they decided to modify that and eliminate parking minimums throughout the entirety of the planning area. I know it's a little challenging to understand what does that mean, what is a half mile versus a quarter mile, so we have a couple images here that will show you the difference. So you can see a bunch of concentric circles. The smallest circle, that's the deep kind of burgundy color, that's a quarter mile radius. So you can see up here at the top, this is one of our BRT stations. Down here to the south, it's outside the planning area, but that's a BRT station. And then we have our Rockville Metro station in the middle. So the smallest circle is that quarter mile. The kind of medium circle, it's that bright cherry red, that's your 1/2 mile radius. So everything that you see highlighted in blue right now is what would have been proposed for the elimination of parking minimums with the April draft. Quarter mile from the BRT, half a mile from the metro. The area that you see in red is that difference that would now be exempted from parking minimums as a result of the Planning Commission approved draft. So the area that we're talking about is really about 3 blocks right up here along North Washington and Martins Lane. We've also had quite a few questions asking why are we proposing the elimination of parking minimums? What reasons could we have? And there are quite a few. So first, and I would say probably foremost in this plan, since this plan has a major goal of housing production and housing affordability, is the impact that parking requirements have on affordability of housing units. And when I say that, I'm talking about fee simple units as well as rental units. Parking is expensive to build. Like $25,000, $30,000 a space to build. And when we have parking requirements that in many cases are a little bit arbitrary, we're taking a guess as to how many people we think will be at any given land use time at any given time of the day. We're forcing folks when they develop, let's say an apartment building in this example, we're forcing them to build a certain number of parking at a very high cost, even if it's not going to be used. At the end of the day, the bill for that needs to get paid in one way or another, and 9 times out of 10, the person who's paying for that bill is the end consumer at the end of the day. We've done quite a bit of studies about communities that have eliminating parking minimums and the impact that we're seeing on rents. There was one that was done not too long ago that shows simply not having structured parking on site reduces rent by up to 17%. 17% may seem like a lot, it may seem like a little, but when we're talking about folks in our community who I think somebody said earlier this evening, $2,300 a month in rent, 17% of that, can make a difference to a lot of people. So that's the first reason that we're recommending the elimination. Another reason is we want to encourage active transportation and the environmental benefits that come with having less vehicles on the road. If there is less parking there, people are going to turn to alternative transportation sources. Not everybody. There's absolutely going to be some people that for whatever reason have to use a car. Maybe they have an impairment that requires that to be the case. Maybe they just really enjoy driving their car. It's not going to be everyone. Our goal is not to eliminate cars entirely in town center. Our goal is to right-size our parking requirements here. We have an excess of public parking right now. We've looked with our friends at Moorguard and looked at the occupancy rates of some of their parking garages over several months. Some of the occupancy rates is as low as 18% in some of those garages. Yes.
I don't want to ask too many questions now, but at some point will you go back and will we be able to ask questions on these specific slides?
Yes. Yep. We're going to go through all of these slides again.
Perfect.
Yep. As I mentioned, Montgomery County has eliminated parking minimums, so that's a reason too. We want to align ourselves with them. We want to be competitive. And broadly speaking, it's a best practice, both nationally and regionally, to lower our parking requirements at transit. The biggest thing that I would like to hit on this slide is if we eliminate minimum parking requirements, that does not mean we're eliminating parking. That means I'm not telling you how much parking you have to build. That means you get to decide how much parking you have to build. We've spoken with Montgomery County because, as I mentioned, they have this law on the books. And in 2/3 of the cases that they've seen come through since this law went through, the proposal is for as much or more parking than it would have been required prior to that. So we are providing flexibility. We are allowing folks to look and say, hey, how many people do we actually think are going to be living here? How many of those people are going to rely on this vehicle? But we're not telling them that number. Really, really important. I think a lot of folks here know parking and they think either the existing parking is going away or that nothing else will ever be added to our inventory. And practically in a community like Rockville, outside of the Beltway, it's not going to happen. We've spoke with lots of folks in the development community and they would never be able to finance a project that didn't have some degree of parking here in Rockville. So now moving on to some of the staff proposed changes. One of the changes that we would like to make, and this is not written as it is on your screen in your staff report, this is on action 5.1.1. And in your staff report, we say there's kind of an evolving situation about the design of the BRT. We're gonna come to you on December 9th with some suggestions. This is us coming to you with suggestions. So action 5.1.1 in both the April and September drafts says to advocate for the southbound Rockville Metro Station stop on the bus rapid transit route to be located on the south side of East Middle Lane. The mayor and council back in, I believe it was 2022, endorsed that as well. We wanted it to be on the south side because we wanted to minimize the number of crossings of major roads that folks will have to take to get from the metro to the BRT station and vice versa. In recent conversations with the Montgomery County Department of Transportation, by recent I'm saying in the last 3 to 4 weeks, they've continued their engineering studies and it may not be feasible to construct the station on the south side of East Middle Lane. We've asked them to really look hard at it. We've stressed why we think it's important that it's in that location, but there are some utility easements, there's some property acquisition, there's quite a few things that might make just the geometry of a station in that location challenging. As a result, staff are proposing that we modify action 5.1.1 so that it will read to advocate for the Rockville Metro Station stops on the BRT to be located as close to the metro station as possible to minimize pedestrian crossings. Our hope is that this gets to the same intent without the plan saying the station must be here, and then if it's not physically possible for the station to be there, that we won't come into some issues with the station not being compliant with our plan. We're almost done here. Moving into parks. Probably the biggest item in the parks chapter that we call for is improvements to Promenade Park, which is that walkway to get to the pedestrian bridge over to the metro. The plan also proposes right now 4 new parks, but staff are proposing a 5th new park to be added. So those parks that we propose, the first one is on the 200 block of Monroe Street. This is an area that's been identified in the current Rockville 2040 plan. We've talked about a park in this area. All this plan does is it refines the geography because the 2040 plan proposes some of the properties that are south of Fleet Street should also have to contribute to the park, which when we look at some of those and the size of them, it doesn't really seem realistic or reasonable to ask them to. So the only difference between the current plan and this plan now is we've narrowed the geography of where we want this park to be. We've narrowed it down to a block from 2 to 3 blocks. 301 Hungerford Drive is another area we identify for a park. If this ever redevelops, if WMATA builds a structured parking facility as a part of their redevelopment, and this parking is not needed, it would be a great entry park into town center. We call for improvements to the area outside of the Unity Bridge. For those of you who have been over that Unity Bridge, there's not much there. It's kind of a sidewalk and then it goes into this ramp and that's all that's there. Are there opportunities here that we can make that into more of a rest space or a gathering space for cyclists and pedestrians? 260 North Washington Street is a little unorthodox, but probably the park that I'm most excited about. This is currently a Shell gas station. And as you can see on this map, it's a little bit of an island. North Washington actually splits, goes around the property, and then comes back together. From a traffic perspective, it's a little confusing. If you don't know what's going on, you don't know which way to go. But as we look towards the future, if we don't need as many gas stations as we currently do, that could be a great opportunity to turn that area into a park facility for the northern part of the planning area. And then the fifth park, which is what staff are proposing and seeking some direction from you all tonight, is to add a park in the vicinity of 414, 416 Hungerford Drive. So to orient us, we have Hungerford Drive, Maryland 355 here, we have Bell here, and we have North Washington Street over here. The 2040 plan currently calls for a park in this general vicinity. I would say probably about a year ago, we received a development application for the redevelopment of these parcels, 414 and 416 Hungerford, and they understood that the plan calls for the extension of Maryland Avenue. They understood that the plan calls for a park, and they put forth a proposal that does both of those things. The reason that we did not carry the recommendation for that park forward back in April when we released it is we thought that would be signed, sealed, delivered. And we didn't think we needed to put it in the plan because we thought there would have been agreements already in place with that developer in the city for parkland in this space. That has not happened yet. The conversation is still continuing and evolving, but nothing has been executed. So we would like to put that recommendation for a park back into the plan. You can see over on the right side of the screen, this is a very high level concept of what's proposed by the applicant right now. So Maryland Avenue would continue to go north. There's long been plans of continuing Maryland Avenue up to Dawson. And then these two triangular out parcels that would be to the west of Maryland Avenue extended, those would be dedicated to the park or dedicated to the city as park property. And then finally, staff have a series of proposed edits. These are largely kind of clerical in nature. Beyond the park, none of them are major impacting any of the recommended actions. But for transparency's sake, we want to make sure that the body agrees with making those edits. And then as far as next steps, right now the schedule, we had our 2 public hearings. We're obviously in our work session tonight, and we're currently scheduled for adoption on January 13th. We do recommend the record be held open, which you all agreed to a few moments ago, so we're good to go there. So now we're going to go back through all of our questions and all of our slides, and this is a great time to ask questions of us, to have discussion amongst yourself as a body. We're going to start on housing. Our goal of 2,000 net new residential units. And we would like to hear from this body, is the goal of 2,000 units appropriate for this area? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? What would you like to see there?
I have a couple of questions. There were a couple areas where I had questions on your slides that are not necessarily tied to these questions.
Okay.
So how do you want us to handle that?
I would say hold them until we get to those slides because we're going to recycle all of the slides.
Okay, some will help inform the answers to the questions, so I may have to ask them ahead of time.
Okay.
But I guess my first question, before we go into whether it's an appropriate goal or not, is how did you get to this number?
Great question. Yeah, so combo of a couple different things. One thing that we did was we looked at our development pipeline. What applications have already been submitted within the planning area? What's the unit goals that are proposed in there? As well as looking a bit further ahead on maybe we've not had an application actually be submitted, but we've had some conversations of like, hi, I own this building. I'm generally interested in something in this range. So part of it was adding up those numbers. Certainly part of it was looking at the metro station concept and what was proposed there, knowing it's not going to be all 1,100 units on this side. So we kind of picked a split that we felt like was appropriate. We added all those numbers up and we added about 800 units to it. That's how we got to that goal.
So I did my back of the napkin math as well, and I already got to 2,200 plus units without even touching North Washington, really. So
of actual submitted development applications?
Well, I'm looking at, you mentioned 414, 416. There's 600, which I don't know if you count 600 within this plan or just out. So that's okay.
Yep.
So I'm just averaging based on what we've seen. Maybe 414, 416. How many is that? Is it about 300?
It's a little less than 300. Yeah.
Right. So around 300.
Yep.
And then the 600 block of 255. That's about 300.
No, the 600 block of Hungerford Drive is 44.
44 total
units. Yeah.
Units
it's
on
a
that
2 over
massive
2
property.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, that's where the how is that? I guess you'll let us know.
We can provide the backup of which
I think that would
properties
be
and how we
helpful.
did that. That's not a
'Cause
problem.
255 is about 350, right? I think you had that in your document. The metro, how much did you allocate to the metro? Was that 600 or 800? Because I know you said about.
I would have to look into my notes. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I have an Excel sheet that has all of this.
Okay, and I think 41 Maryland's between 100 and 130. Did you count for Town Center Apartments, which is owned by Housing Opportunities Commission?
We did not, because we've not seen a development application or heard from them as of the time that we came up with that goal.
So did you count it in the total number of units that are existing?
Yes.
Okay. Because it's 100
I don't
units.
know.
It's 100 units and it's vacant.
We pulled from census data, so I would have to go back and look. I'm not sure.
Can we find that out by next week's work session?
Yes, we definitely can.
And then I know there's also a lot by MHP near Bell Grant.
Yes.
So that's the one thing that potentially from North Washington. So that's still right there at about 2,000, sorry. So I'm not sure. That's why I was trying to figure out where this 2,000 number came from, because it seems.
I can provide the backup.
Okay.
That's not a problem.
And if we could also, I think it's hard to say what is adequate when we can't see what the backup is.
Fair.
And do you have a sense of what North Washington, based on the conversations you're having and what you think is, appropriate use of land use could be? Because I factored in another 800 there as well.
Yeah, so because we were looking primarily at active conversations that we have with developers, I think there was only one property on North Washington Street that we included in that map, because that was the only one that we had actually sat down with someone to say, hey, I'm interested in doing X number of units there. I don't believe we have any active development applications on the North Washington Street corridor, so we don't have anything to add in there.
Okay, I'm happy to say it seems like this number does not adequately take in, when you count Metro, all of this, but again, without having the math in front of us to make informed decisions, it's hard to guess.
Yep.
But based on guessing, it looks like there's at least 3,000 with the potential between some of the North Washington, like maybe 3 properties in North Washington and what we talked about already. So I personally can't make a final decision or a really educated guess until I get to see the math that you all have.
Okay.
Colleagues, do you want to speak to this, or you want to wait until we get the math?
Well,
Councilman Van Grack, go ahead, and then Councilman Bashaw, and then Councilman Jackson, are you going next? Okay, all right.
I'll just support similar to what the mayor said. I did back of the napkin, review, and I think we've got to look not just at the application, but what we're really likely to occur. And I think it's more than 2,000 kind of across the board. So if you want an answer to this question, should it be higher? Yes, I think it should. I think that's reasonable. And even if, what is in the pipeline that we believe is coming, even if it reaches 2,000, I think given what at least I'm looking for, and hopefully some of my colleagues are looking for Town Center, then the answer should be more than 2,000.
Councilman Bashaw.
First off, thank you for all your work in putting together the plan. Just off of this question, yes, I do think it should be higher. I would like to see the math. When we say 2,000 units, that could mean a lot of different things and a lot of different experiences for the people in the unit. I know on average, most renters are living in 2 to 3 bedrooms, and I know that that's a little bit smaller in town center. Are these will most of these units be sizes for families, or are they going to be studios, 1 bedrooms that can kind of change the demographics and a lot of things, especially for the experience of the renter?
So this plan does not propose any like requirements of a split of the units that would be, developed at the time of development application for any given project. There is language within the housing chapter that talks about the need for a diversity of housing unit types, both as far as the built form, but their size and the number of bedrooms. But right now the draft doesn't have that as any sort of requirement or sets a performer or anything like that.
My point of concern is that for most renters, most renters live in 2 to 3 bedrooms in the city of Rockville right now, today. And with that being, most of the units being built are studio and 1 bedroom. My concern, in the absence of rent stabilization, in the absence of any types of real protection for the increasing costs of rent, my concern is that there are very few places where a lot of families can go to move. And so I would just want to know a little bit more about like some of the details of these 2,000 units.
Thank you. To the point, I just wanted to ask, is there flexibility? And I know that in the comp plan, we have spoken to trying to encourage 2 and 3 bedrooms. I know that we've gotten pushback on that periodically because the 3-bedroom plus really does cost, we're told, costs a lot more in terms of it's cheaper to build a single family 3-bedroom than to have, it in multifamily. But is there a way that we could have splits on the MPDUs at least? I mean, that is, we can't necessarily, I know the city cannot necessarily dictate the number of bedrooms, but on the market rate, is that correct? We can't dictate that.
I believe so.
We cannot. I'm seeing we cannot.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so, but can we dictate the MPDU so that the affordable units?
That's a question for our housing team. I think we might have someone.
And I know we're looking at the
housing
MPD
on.
regulations, so I just wanted to flag maybe something that you guys can get back to us on.
We'll get back to you.
We'll
on
look
that.
into it.
Okay, all right, because I do know that families need a place to live, as my colleague mentioned, and if there's a way that we can use what we can control to try to get those units, that would be helpful. Councilmember Valeri.
I did no math on the back of anything, so I appreciate the work. I appreciate all the work of this report, but I have a couple of questions. While I know that we cannot maybe not be dictatorial, do we have an inventory of generally the breakdown of bedroom number between both market rate and MPDU units? For myself, at least, that would be helpful for me, just broadly in determining and looking at as new development comes into town center. That would be really helpful. And then I presume we, of course, would want all 2,000 units to be affordable housing, but is there any, is the goal as broad as possible, or do we have, planning area affordable goals that may more closely line up to some of the market forces right now?
We don't have a specific breakdown such as of the 2,000, X number should be affordable. We know because of our current MPDU ordinance that 15% of developments larger than, I believe it's 20 units now. So that's some guarantee, or not guarantee, but we have some assurance as to the number that will be developed there. What's harder to predict is if we have any like LIHTC or other like strictly affordable housing to come in. I know we've talked with some folks in the area about that being a need in our Rockville community, but it's hard to predict exactly what that would be.
I can completely appreciate that. I just had that in the back of my mind, if that is our goal, seeing as, we really can't have 100%, which would be fantastic, but, what can we strive towards? So that would be kind of where I am at. I love more than 2,000, but I defer to people as we get more data and people do more calculations on the back of napkins.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw.
Yeah, I don't think the MPDU percentage of 15% is enough. And I think the majority of people, particularly the majority of renters, considering town center is like 75% renters, and the average median income, I think, is around 96,000. So the majority of renters already make too much money in terms of to get an MPDU. So again, this is layering on my concern around the displacement of people. Is there anything you can share to speak to that in terms? I know the goal of the plan is to try to increase the quote affordable, and affordable is lower than market. Like even if it's 1 cent lower, it's lower than market. So how are we going to address like the middle class renters in town center? And this is, I think, looking at our 40 different strategies, none of them addresses displacement for our middle class renters. So could you share a little bit more on that?
Sure. So you're correct. There's nothing in the plan right now that talks about displacement. We do in the housing section have quite a few recommendations for incentives to incentivize the affordable housing below, what is or above, I guess, what the MPDUs are. To your point, affordable is a broad term and there's different bands of affordability. This plan does not go into the specific breakdown of those bands, but we talk about incentives such as streamlining our approval process, such as lowering the threshold for impact taxes for developments that include above that requirement of MPDUs. We talk about a property tax abatement potentially to help offset the cost and close that capital stack. So we talk about strategies to get to those higher numbers. We do not have anything about displacement right now. Knowing what we know about the built environment here, I think there's absolutely a chance for some housing to be redeveloped, but I think largely the redevelopment opportunities that we're seeing are going from a non-residential use into a residential use. So looking at the office spaces or the retail spaces that are not thriving right now, that's where we're most likely to see some of that residential growth.
Thank you. Can I ask, did you factor into any of your math redevelopment of existing housing? It sounds like not. I just wanted to make sure that there are some places along North Washington that are targeted towards affordable housing now that I would not want to inadvertently.
Yep. We did not take any existing housing and propose the redevelopment of that housing in that number. So like Bell's Grant, for example, we assume that is staying as it currently is. Main Street Apartments, we assume that is staying as it currently is.
Right. And also just to note that Town Center does have some areas that have dedicated affordable, so I think Victory, Residence is on the Lane, Bell's Grant, potentially the redevelopment of Town Center Apartments, which would not displace because there's no one in there right now, but we do want to get that back up so people can live there. And then potentially, I know you noted 41 Maryland Avenue in this as well. So those would be new affordable, but some of those would be dependent on LIHTC, which also does have a lower income sort of band requirement. I know that we talked about increasing what we call moderately priced dwelling units to include a bit more of some middle income salaries for people who are police officers and teachers, people we've heard from that want to live in the city. And I'm very interested to see creativity on how we can do that. My question for you is, the Council of Governments, COG, has a housing target for us that we agreed to, which is 8,600. We're at 50%. They've also subsequently said that about 70% of that should be affordable. And so I know initially when the comprehensive plan came out, I tried to push for the bonus density to try to encourage people to do more affordable, but to the comments of my colleague,
we do need to find ways to get to more affordability as well throughout all of our projects. Did you have another? Councilmember Shaw.
I believe in the report it said that those that are cost burden in town center are about 42%. I think in the city it's about 56%, but in town center it's 42%. And there's a number of different strategies and incentives for developers to develop more units. How long will that take in terms of like building new housing on average in town center?
Are you talking about how long to get to that 2,000 number, or how long would an average project take from conception to being constructed?
Yeah, how long an average project would take?
I think that's a little bit subject to the conditions of the property, right? We have several pieces of land, many of those that are identified as focus areas that have already been entitled for development that we haven't actually seen happening. So 41 Maryland Avenue is an example, 220 East Mill Lane is an example. For those, in theory, it could be much quicker because they've already gone through the development review process. They already have all their entitlements in place. They would just need to file for permits. Whereas if something is coming like truly from conception out of the ground, my guess is you're probably looking at like 4-ish years, maybe. It's going to depend on the construction type. It's going to depend on, a variety of factors. But my guess is for most new multifamily, you're probably looking at 18 to 24 months for construction alone.
Can you clarify the number of cost burden in town center? I also read a number that said 36%.
I'm going to need to find that number. If you give me a moment here, we can look it up. I
Sure.
don't know it off the top of my head.
Looking at, and you said that 200 Middle Lane, I think, is something that has an application?
220. So that was approved under a planned development at the same time that the Choice Hotel or the former Choice Hotel building was, but they never constructed that next phase.
That's the parking lot in front of Kabuto?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And that just sold, so we don't know the intention of the new.
And I don't think at least staff knows who that sold to.
Yes, we do.
We do now.
I
Great.
found out this weekend. We sent it to the
Great.
city manager. He can tell you, and we can
Wonderful.
find out who that is and start having conversations. Councilmember Fulton?
So I just wanted to, much like my colleagues, it would help to see a little bit of math and also like trend data comparative, like to get to what a housing goal should look like. That being said, yes, I support a higher housing goal than 2,000. I think we should take, how do I say this right? Much in the same vein of that we have a Vision Zero plan. We set aspirational goals in this city, and we should not be conservative in what we're trying to do with housing in town center.
Thank you. Councilmember Jackson?
Yes, I just want to echo Councilmember Fulton. I think she just put it succinctly. 2,000 is a nice goal, but we should be higher and we should be aspirational.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Shaw?
So I think the number for cost burden renters is 42%, and then homeowners I think is 36%.
Yes, that's correct. And that's on page 63 of the draft plan. It's the very last paragraph.
Perfect. Thank you. So I think we're good on this question, and we'll get back to next week with the work session so we can set an evidence-based target or at least information-based target.
Great. So our next set of slides is on the metro station concept. So you can see this here. This is within the area vision section of the land use chapter that we talk about endorsing. This concept, we talk kind of broadly about there being an option to extend the bridge. We don't call for which specific option because we know there's going to be constraints and restrictions there. So in general today, we want to make sure that you all are in agreement that we should be including this concept for the metro station in this plan, given that it's within the planning area. And if that is the case, we will certainly continue to keep it in the plan. But at next week's meeting, staff will be bringing forth a resolution for you all to vote on, kind of formalizing that endorsement. That's a step that WMATA needs in order for them to start their joint solicitation process and clearing everything with their board.
I'll say that I know that many of us spoke this morning that we're interested in moving the metro forward. We had a very detailed conversation back in May where we all agreed on concept one,
and we actually pushed for the resolution. So I think we're on board. I will share personally that I did share some potential edits to that resolution. And there's some things that speak in the document that speak to what we will do on December 9th. So obviously, I think you guys created that before we moved it to the 16th. So I just want to flag that. I will say this, what I don't see in the resolution is that in order for housing to happen at Metro, we have to be intentional about what that RFP process looks like. Are we going to wait 5 years until Metro, estimated 5 years, until Metro puts out the RFP and goes to process, or will the city exercise one of the two options, which I think only one is viable, that Metro said that you can come forward with an unsolicited RFP, and that is if there's a public involvement in a partnership. So I think there needs to be more discussion about how to make that happen, so that, as my colleagues have shared, we're not just being we're being aspirational, but we're also doing the work to get to the targets. Colleagues, did you have anything else to add? Councilmember Valeri.
Yeah, we did have a good conversation this morning about exactly what we're looking at here. I think that the devil is in the details of the resolution, which I don't think completely captures, I think, the positives that we were addressing, or perhaps are frankly maybe even needed. If you're saying that WMATA just needs, a resolution from us saying, you guys really in? Yeah, we're really in. Okay, that's great. Maybe we don't need to go any deeper than that. My concern is twofold. I'm always supportive of the concept plan, so that's not an issue here. One is, and you and I talked about it during the break, which was most of this is in planning area 1. Part of the concept plan is outside of planning area 1. We also know of interest in the other metro station. We do have more than one in the city. And we do know that that was also part of the adopted comprehensive master plan, that looking at the opportunities around Twin Brook Metro. And there are many opportunities, and we have seen one come online, and there's going to be additional ones. So essentially, I guess what I'm saying is, does WMATA need something like that, broadly general? Yes, we would really like to work with WMATA on also bringing necessary development and investment around all of our metro stations. I don't know. It'd be nice to get ahead of that personally, but I don't think it's a matter of us not supporting the concept. I think it was it's still going to be a bigger discussion, and once we get down into the details. But I appreciate all of the work, and I know, especially on things like the bridge add-on, I'm a big fan of that. Wish we could do more than that, but money doesn't grow on trees, and I get that. But there's so many more. There's a lot of opportunities to really brand Rockville Town Center through this particular gateway that's connected to the metro. So I'm very supportive of the concept plan. I just want to also make sure that we're not losing sight of our citywide development goals while we're in this process.
I want to add to that point. The current resolution for WMATA only includes Rockville Station and encourages pedestrian safety, some of the wayfinding pieces to make an entryway, as well as housing. So those are 3 things we talked about in May. But I do recall that the body also talked about Twin Brook Metro as well. I believe there is one unsolicited RFP that went through. Of the 2 options, the annexing way, and that project is moving forward. Is there anything we need to add to that resolution in the future or here? I mean, it wouldn't go here, I know, because it's not part of Rockville Town Center, but that may be something to consider, whether we need to add that, because if you're saying they need to have something from us in order to move to RFP, I just wanted to flag it.
I'd recommend at this point just sticking with the Rockville Metro Station for the resolution with the edits that we've heard from others. And when I meet with them to talk about next steps, I'll ask about Twin Brook as well and what they need to hear from us regarding Twin Brook, and I'll report back to everybody.
Okay, anything else on this? Okay, next question, please.
All right, so now we are going into base building height. As we spoke earlier, the base building heights have not changed between the drafts. So we're looking at 200 feet in the core and then 75 feet on the edge and transition. So our questions for you are the proposed base building heights acceptable for each character area? Do you think there are any areas that should have increased base building height?
I have one question and then I'm going to pass it around. So I know this, probably everyone's going to speak on this. Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, all right, so my question, just generally speaking, is, and I give you a heads up on this, along 355 seems where it's a great place to add additional height. What would it take to add an additional, what I call corridor transition, so that on 355, because there's precedence with, and I shared my responses to the questions that I shared and the answers that you gave with my colleagues, which I think the 51 Monroe is 235 feet and 255 is 217 PD'd. Okay, so my question is, could we have an additional a bonus option there or height options on that corridor? I'll lead with that. And then my question is, along one of the transition zones, there is an apartment building near Heritage, which is Heritage House. I was just curious on the rationale for why there wasn't height allowed in front of that property. And I'm sure there's others along North Washington.
So I'll answer the first question, what would be the process to get additional height? So certainly if, a majority of the body agrees to that, staff think the cleanest way to do that would be create a new character area for a geography that you all decide is the area that you want to have that height. And we would attach the base building height and we would attach any bonus density height to that character area. That's the same way the height is kind of brought forth with all the existing character areas that we have. So you all as a body, staff can make some suggestions, but we're looking to you all to see if that's something you want to entertain and where you may want to entertain that. But what we would do is we would come back to you with a map showing those areas, get the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and then we would discuss what that height should be. Again, staff have some suggestions. If the body would like to explore that, we can provide you with some of our, guesses for that or recommendations. But that's the process. It would be creating a new character area. The second question about Heritage House. So Heritage House is, I believe it's 63 feet in height total. The base building height allowed in the edge, which is the properties that are adjacent to Heritage House, is 75 feet. So we would still be allowing height there taller than what would be allowed at Heritage House. It would be the 75 feet base and then up to 100 feet with that bonus height. So that property was not specifically singled out at any time in the process of that needs even more than what that edge is. I believe, you were referring to this transition. Maybe that's where we want to put that transition area. We had kind of kept that entire corridor as edge. There wasn't much more rhyme behind that.
Thank you. Councilmember Fulton.
Thank you. So two things. One, yes, I would very much support a new character area along 355 with higher height. At the same time, I was wondering what my colleagues actually thought before we start talking about what the heights are in the existing three areas. I'm not sure that I fully understand why we split the edge into two different areas. And I would, unless I can come up with a way to understand it, I would combine those back into one edge and treat the entire western edge the same way.
So do you want me to speak to that or do you want to keep the
Yeah, if you can help me understand what the rationale was, that'd be great.
Yep. So candidly, in the April draft, it was all edge. There was only two character areas. There was the core and then there was the edge. Everything that was along North Washington Street was in the edge. Everything to the east was in the core for the most part. That idea to add in that third character area stemmed from our planning commission process. Their rationale was a few things. One, that area is still within the 1/2 mile metro radius. So thinking that we want to have our densest land uses there. They also had some conversation about adjacent land uses. I know there are some historic properties that are adjacent. Some of Rockville's oldest buildings are there, but there are also commercial properties there, not necessarily residential properties. So that was another thing that they said. And frankly, the Planning Commission said this is an area that we think the market would support more growth in. So we want to allow that growth to happen.
Maybe one follow-up. I want to be sort of clear on the way I'm thinking about it based on that rationale. All of that rationale of like it's relatively close to transit, it's where we want to have some density, I would apply to, I don't think that other than it just being specifically closer to the town square, that really narrow district or area is substantively different than the original edge from April. That being said, I would take the thought process behind the Planning Commission's transition area, allowing for more height there, and apply that to the entire edge. So when I say I would treat it all in one way, I don't mean I would take the increased height in the transition area and apply it to the whole edge. Is the way I'm thinking about it. I'd love to hear what my colleagues think.
Councilmember Valeri is next.
I always want to just jump in, but I can't do that. I'm in agreement because I frankly was trying to figure out why on the transition area. I hear what you're saying, but I also know if we look at, I'm looking at these wonderful maps in the report, and thank you to everybody for these. I love maps. You know, we also have some significant historical buildings in the core as well. So I really was trying to kind of understand a little bit more about the rationale of breaking the edge off further into this transition. And I agree with Councilmember Fulton on that. And I had sent this question in previously. I'm not putting you on the spot. I know that there's no good answer to this, but I'm still grappling a little bit with how planning area 1 was geographically determined. Totally appreciate it. Would have loved to have seen the Planning Commission look at that because there's that upper northwest corner that is edge, but it just seems like another oddity. So, but in general, on the height, on this issue in particular, I would like the consistency of the edge to be the edge.
Can I ask a baseline question? And I did share some, like for instance, there are places along North Washington, like in front of Heritage House, where I think we could handle more height. My question is just to understand the edge a little bit better first, before I get more deeply into that. Why is the Ivy League Lane area included in this transition zone? I don't support that. I have a concern because I'm wondering, as we make these changes, do we increase the land value that then causes more property tax increases to those townhomes? There's about 200 of them. They're not going anywhere. So I want to understand why that's in there, and is that a potential impact?
So the way it was designed originally in April was that everything would be assigned to one land use category or one character area, either the core or the edge at that time. Now we've evolved into those three. So Ivy League Lane was included just the same as Richard Montgomery is included, just the same as many of our historic properties that we know aren't going to be demolished for redevelopment. So we kind of did an equal treatment of you should be core or you should be edge. That's why Ivy League Lane is in there. Practically, I think the odds of any redevelopment actually happening there are very, very rare. As you mentioned, it's 200 homes. You would have to acquire every single one of those homes for any redevelopment to happen. Our thought with this is if the goal is to increase density and encourage flexibility, let's put the conditions there that something could theoretically happen in the future, knowing that just because the zoning says you can do something doesn't mean that something is going to happen. So that's why Ivy League Lane is included in that edge.
So my second question is, could what we do have an impact on property taxes? Because there are discussions about property taxes based on land value, and
Yeah.
if you increase that land value, you could eventually increase
So
the tax.
we're going to have to get back to you on that. We've had a couple of conversations and requests for conversations with the State Department of Taxation Assessments relative to the zoning ordinance rewrite and the impact that changing zones would have on that. So I can go back with our zoning team and we can get you an answer on that.
I just wanted to flag that some of those are naturally occurring somewhat more affordable places, and I would be very concerned about displacing through property tax increases. So I just want to be very careful there. If it's not likely to change, I have deep concerns. Mr. Mihalik.
Thank you, Mayor. Typically, land use designations on long-range plans don't de facto change property values themselves. It's really only when the zoning is changed. Because a property could have a certain land use designation, but if the property owner doesn't do something to change the zoning, then it really doesn't impact the development itself. It's really when zoning happens is when it happens. But if you're asking the question, does this land use designation pave the way for a easier path to zoning? Yes, it would. But not until zoning would it have an actual property tax valuation modification.
Thank you. And during the housing discussion, there was a totally different approach presented on potentially changing property taxes based on land value. So that was something proposed by staff as an option. And so that raised my concern here.
Thank you.
I just want to be careful that we don't hurt residents in our attempt to, we may not consider, I don't want any unintended consequences. So, Councilmember Van Grack.
I'm just going to be brief because I think there's a couple questions in front of us. With regard to a corridor along 355 of increasing it to encourage development, I support that 100%. With regard to the edge and transition area, I agree with Councilmember Fulton. I don't see a need for that delineation as significantly as here, and I'd actually put the larger designation throughout the whole.
Thank you. And just one more question that could help inform. I know that layback slopes apply to when you have residential right behind. When you come back to us next week, can you show us, as we do the potential corridor changes, where that would impact and what would get layback slopes and what would not?
Yep, we can definitely do that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Jackson.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I'll be brief. I agree with my colleagues Van Grack and Fulton with the guard door as well as the 355 corridor or whatever it is.
That was my
Oh, and the mayor. But I agree with the mayor with her proposal of the corridors expanded height, as well as Councilmember Fulton on her recommendation to have the edge and the transition area be the same.
Thank you. Just so that it has, for those who haven't spoken, do you want to, Councilmember Shaw and Dr. Miles? Dr. Miles, do you have any comments or questions on this?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I am in support of increasing building heights consistent with the character area as presented. Thank you.
And are you okay with the new corridor?
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Shaw.
I also agree with increasing the height on 355 corridor. I would like to see an increase in terms of the affordable housing bonus as well.
When you say an increase, do you have something specific in mind? It's okay if the answer is no. If you're thinking of something specific.
I would like staff to provide some more options and recommendations on that. Thank you.
Thank you. So your goal is to try to get to more affordable? Yes. Yes, which is my goal as well. Okay, and I know for me, I would like to get the answer on Ivy League Lane. I just don't want to inadvertently hurt anybody. And just the question on the layback slopes, because I do support the additional height in general as a matter of principle. I do believe that there should be some transition as you get to residential. In discussions with staff during the comprehensive plan, I was told that there would be layback slopes, and that was not shared this time, which is a shift, and I don't know why that changed. But I'd like to get more information so that we're transparent on what would have layback slopes or not, and if there are opportunities to do that, what we need to do. I just want to understand it so that we have information. Councilmember Fulton.
I just wanted to offer one thought going into the rest of the questions based on the exchange on Ivy League Lane. I lived in Ivy League Lane. I have neighbors there. Like, I care about that place. But the discussion about putting in plans for the long-term future, Ms. Gerber's talked about that. That's the way I view this. Like, we need to be thinking 20 years in the future. And I love Ivy League Lane, but we need to be able to put in plans, things to allow for what we want in the long term. It was also interesting to raise, like, both Councilmember Shaw and the mayor talked about what do we mean by affordable housing. I'm not sure those townhouses are affordable, but I say that because it's the question of, like, when we say we want more affordable housing, we should all probably be a little bit like, what do we mean by that? Because there's a lot of different ways to
Some
look
new
at it.
townhomes are selling for $7 to $1 million plus.
They're selling in Ivy League Lane for $7 million.
But I mean, 7 is on the lower range. I've seen several that are, some that are not that level, but the new townhomes that are coming out are like 1 million, some of them that are in Rockville. So yeah. And I also don't necessarily, I want to understand the implications on if it is not developed now, what's the impact on the taxes to that person that could potentially displace residents. I think it's information we should know. And also when you change the zoning, you also have implications on how that things transition as well. So that's all information that I think should be forthcoming from staff so that we at least can make informed decisions on what this really means and what the impacts are to residents. Councilmember Valeri.
I'm in agreement with all this. Ditto. What you were saying about, like, having a defined, how we're defining affordability, and I guess I'm just mostly dittoing that, but I always appreciate your feedback. I'm looking at this map again, and I stared at this map for ages. And I see that actually coming out of, to the south of Rockville Town Center, at around the Mixing Bowl. So the Americana Center part of the Mixing Bowl, which is the beloved intersection of Veers Mill Road and Rockville Pike. The Americana Center is core, but then we have this little corner of edge, which is kind of off that slip lane where it's office. I'd love to know generally what the thinking was there, and in part I'm raising this because I'm like, I'm sorry.
Can you guys tell us the property number? Do you know what she's talking about?
I think you're talking about Jefferson Plaza.
Yeah, I'm talking Jefferson Plaza.
I want to say it's 500 or 600 Jefferson Plaza.
I think it's one of the two. All I know is that RM students walk by it, and I know that pedestrian experience. So I had questions kind of generally about, when we're coming out of Rockville Town Center, and I'm in agreement on let's go even higher along 355. But I want to see that continue southward at a minimum, right? So that when we start looking beyond Rockville Town Center, and when we got this master plan, and we're looking at the next steps in really actualizing the zoning ordinance rewrite and actualizing our comprehensive master plan, what I could see here in theory is possible, right? Would be the possibility of having like a dip in height there, and if was there a rationale for that, A. B, I would love to have the consistency of the increase of height that we're talking about in town center from all along southbound Rockville Pike to the city limit. Because I think that that's where we're kind of headed. I think future-wise, we're looking at, the combination of combining eventually the southern part of the city, connecting it through mixed use to Rockville Town Center would be awesome. And I just want to make sure that we are planning ahead for that too. I wouldn't suspect that there would be a problem there, but when I looked at this, I was like, that's odd, that little edge area right on that corner. So that's my really long-winded way of saying, was there a thought process behind that? And if there's not, totally okay. And if you need to get back, that's okay too. just kind of popped in my head just now.
Yeah, the main thought there was it would be a transition from the dense core around the metro to Richard Montgomery. And we know that we have a lot of students and it's a lower density over there. That was sort of all of the rationale behind it. If there's direction by the council to see that change, I think that's something staff would be open to entertaining.
I think it's a good point. So right now, that is being treated as transition versus core.
Yeah.
As edge.
It's edge versus core.
Edge
Yes.
versus core. And that does not have, there's no housing around there, it's just buildings.
Yep.
Correct?
That's retail.
So-
Retail and office? I believe so.
I believe there's 1 or 2 residential units that are kind of outliners along Park. I don't think they're actively, I think they're vacant right now, but it's primarily commercial, yes.
Yeah, if you could maybe share a list of those properties and what they are, that would be helpful. It does seem that it is part of the core. Humble opinion, but
That was kind of where I was coming from.
but I do want to make sure that if, as we go to residential, we are thinking about a transition. Councilmember Van Grack.
So I was gonna, one, I do support what Councilmember Valera was saying. I think that area, while currently right now has this office space issue, you're right near areas that could be deemed part of the core. So I think that's a good spot, and I do agree. One issue that I wanted to go to, and this is dealing with, I know that we've talked about potentially combining this core and transition. And if we're going to be going to that upper area that was part of the transition, that's 75 feet for your base and 50 for the bonus. That's a total of 125. Now, we've added the 200, potentially more in the corridor versus 50. Is there a rationale why we're adding 50 as opposed to potentially looking at 100 for those areas and then 25 for a bonus? And I didn't know if there was any kind of talk about those numbers, because you were asking about potentially increasing base building heights.
So why 50 is in the transition and not the edge? Is that the question?
No. I guess I'm saying we're looking now at a number which is kind of, as Councilmember Fulton was saying, in the larger area, that if we put those numbers of 50 for the bonus and 75 for that base versus the core, which has 200 potentially larger in the corridor, and then 50, would it make more sense, because we're just talking about just potentially adjacent to the core, of doing a 100 as the base and 25 as the bonus? And I didn't know if there was that was a potential number that was talked about.
We haven't discussed that. Theoretically, it's possible. I think if we wanted to do it that way, we would have to create a new character area, and we would assign the height, or change it for everything. We didn't discuss it, but we would be open to it.
Okay.
I remember hearing some of the planning commission discussions on it, but I know for myself too, it's that if we're trying to get additional affordable units, then you have to make the bonus density worth it. So if it's just, for me, I like finding ways to allow height, but to really incentivize affordable. And if COG is saying 3/4 of new housing should be more affordable, and I know we have to define affordable, but I would have concern with that we're removing potential incentives to get additional affordable. Councilmember Fulton.
I wanted to follow up on that idea too. I also am curious about, I don't think it's a new edge area. I think it is taking the edge area that we've combined with the used to be transition area and considering a base height of 100 in that area, and then the density bonuses going up from there. And I follow up on what Councilmember Van Grack said in that regard. It would also help to know, well, first of all, on the affordable housing, I agree. We're all up here saying we need more affordable housing and we should do what we can to get that. The increased height itself guarantees more housing and 15% being at least MPDUs. So I tend to think that 15% of something is better than 20% of nothing. That's why I would want to increase the heights. But my question is, where are we getting these feet from? What does that translate into in terms of floors, units? What's the difference between 75 and 100? Can you help me get a sense of that?
Yeah, so the building heights, the floor, is going to vary a little bit depending on the construction type, but you're largely looking at between 10 to 12 feet per floor of unfinished floor to floor height. Your finish is probably going to be like 9 feet because you have all your utilities and HVAC and things like that go up in the ceiling. But you're probably looking at, 10 to 12 per floor. So when we talk about a building that's 75 feet in height or an allowance of 75 feet, you're maybe getting 7 stories. You're probably getting 6 stories because you're probably doing, in like the construction types, you're doing a concrete podium, which tends to be a little bit taller floor to floor. And then typically they're doing a lumber build, a wood build on top of it. It's pretty common, and I would say probably one of the more affordable development like construction types right now is to do that podium with 5 above. So something like that, you're probably getting to like 65, 70 feet with a podium and then those additional stories. It's going to vary on, each project and how they're constructed, certainly depending on the use type. So like if you're seeing like lab uses, they tend to have a higher because they have ventilation needs and hoods and things of that nature, but you're looking like 10 to 12.
And 170, 125?
So my guess is you would probably be in like the 11-story range.
And what is current town center?
When you say what is current town center?
So town square, I should say.
The height of that now, exact building height, I would have to look up, but they're like a podium build. So they're that concrete podium with above, my guess is they're probably like in 60, 65, but I would have to look that up. I don't know that number off the top of my head.
Councilmember Valeri.
It's just a super quick, it's not a question so much as like policies, but do you happen to have, or does the department have like a map that kind of has an overlay of feet by parcel? Or just generally that this has been really helpful for me as far as like looking at the character areas, but it's also because there is variance in the core, I'm just trying to get a sense of like, oh, okay, so this makes sense here because right across from it is a building that's, 8 floors, 9 floors, whatever. I was just curious because I'm with my colleagues. I'm like, feet is great, but as far as like for reference points, it's sometimes hard visually to get a sense of like what we're looking at. Like when we're doing like this increased height on 355, which I'm all good for, it's even hard for me to kind of wrap my brain around. Oh, that's because this building over here, there's a height difference between, the 51 building and then most of, town center. I get that, but anything around that, it's really hard to get a sense of what we're looking at.
So the closest that we have right now is our zoning map, right? So each of our zones have a maximum height that's allowed. Now, of course, there is a difference in almost all of our properties throughout the city. The maximum height is not necessarily what the actual developed height is. Even in our planned developments, which are, as you all know as a body, like very carefully crafted and created, we have planned developments that are approved for taller than what those actual buildings ended up being. So the closest thing we have right now is the zoning map. I think we could probably pretty easily modify the zoning map to have like a table on the side that says maximum height in blue is this. That shouldn't be a problem. Finding the actual heights of buildings, that's a little more complicated.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. I like the previous, that would be really helpful for me at least going forward on this and like other plans as we move forward.
Thank you. And I just wanted to comment on the comments on, so yes, you get more affordable units. Of 15% of a higher number is a higher number of affordable. But if you incentivize affordable through the bonus density, that's 20% of the building is affordable. So that could be a significant number of additional affordable. So I just wanted to make that point. Councilmember Jackson, Councilmember Shaw, is there anything you want to add, Dr. Miles, on this point?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm listening to the conversation, and I agree with the mayor that having bonus what do you call it?
Bonus density.
Bonus density is important, but also I like Councilmember Fulton's idea. So I'm torn. I want to hear a little bit more about it because I think the total height is important, and I understand her rationale that, 15% of 100 is, is better than the 75. But at the same time, you know, we're talking about height all the way around. And so I don't want to miss out on the entire town center and the bonus density that we could have by just focusing in on bonus density for the, I guess what is it called, the edge now, so it's not transition anymore. So that's a long way of saying that I want to listen to more to the debate because I'm torn between the two.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw.
I'm, as I shared, one of my goals is, and I have the same goal in terms of increasing the affordable units. So I wanted to see what type of recommendations staff brings back.
Thank you. Dr. Miles?
I'm overall supportive of increasing height.
Councilman Van Grack?
I was just saying, I mean, one potential compromise, and I know, I mean, we're talking about increasing, but if we go with the base of 100, which is what Councilmember Fulton and I were talking about, and then keep a bonus of 50, you're potentially having a situation where you do have an incentive to go more, but you're also capturing a larger portion of that initial 15%. So I guess it's potential a compromise of a situation where you can potentially have a larger portion, but then also encourage a higher density.
I hear that.
So sorry, the affordable housing,
Yeah.
and also the green space, which is, I know what was added as well.
Yeah, I do know that there are properties like on, unfortunately, some places that we've seen where they're not fully going up to the maximum height. And so you wouldn't get additional affordable. So with allowing the base height to be so tall, they're like, great, thank you, I'll just take that and keep moving and not do the bonus density. So that's kind of what I would like the analysis from staff to come back. And then also there are some areas of, is it the edge now, that are adjacent right up on residential. So I also want to know about the layback slope and which ones would or would not have them so that we can see the potential impacts and just have informed information. So if you could come back to us with all the things that the questions my colleagues have raised.
Yes, and just to echo that last point that you made about, we can control the zoning, we can't control what actually gets developed, right? So, my plan or my goal certainly in bringing this plan forward is to create this sandbox that the private sector can play in and be as flexible and creative as we can in the sandbox. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we can't dictate what happens. We can't force something to happen. So that's important to keep in mind as we talk about a lot of these things. We're setting the framework here. We're not necessarily directing with the magic wand of precisely what's going to happen in every single location.
Thank you.
That is a great segue to our next slide, which is bonus height. So as we spoke about earlier, originally we were thinking that the only thing to get that bonus height that's eligible is MPDUs. And then through the Planning Commission process, that's expanded. So you could get some height for more MPDUs. You can get some height for some green space that's been enhanced with some climate and sustainability features, or you could do both. Because we've now split this where you could do MPDUs and or green space, you can see while the maximum bonus height is there, for the MPDUs alone, you would get a fraction of that maximum bonus height. Similarly, for the green space alone, you're getting a fraction of that bonus height. And then we showed this slide earlier too, showing that the bonus and the core is the same, the edge has increased by 5 feet, and then the transition has increased by 30 feet. So our questions to you are, what improvement should make a project eligible for bonus height? Should it just be housing, or should it be this housing and green space as it's currently drafted, or some other iteration that you all would like to see? And then we'd also like to talk about the heights for that bonus height program.
Thank you. I like the ability to choose, that they can choose what the project can afford. Some projects can afford one thing versus the other, so I support the Planning Commission's recommendation here. But if staff has any other feedback or challenges that you see, this would
imply, I'm open to that.
I wouldn't say challenge us. I think that's a great way of looking at it. If we're providing flexibility, if we'd rather get something rather, instead of putting all of our eggs in one basket, we're spreading those eggs out. I think that's a very fair, logical way to think about it. The flip of that is if our goal is to truly incentivize affordable housing, it dilutes that incentive a little bit by taking what was once 50 feet for 5% of housing and bringing it down to 35 feet for 5% of housing. One concern that we've heard from folks in the private sector about bonus height generally is needing to make sure that the math pencils. That if we are requiring, I'm making up these numbers, this is not a real scenario, but if we're requiring 5% more MPDUs and they're only getting 10 feet of height, that equates to one story. The math doesn't work on that. So I think that's the benefit and the downside of having choices versus streamlining it. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. It's just different priorities.
So is there an option where they could get additional height for the combined total height for the green and the affordable if they do all affordable? But I wouldn't necessarily want to lose any affordable. I'm open to like going in the space of, okay, I'm going to get the entire bonus density from all affordable on the options, but I don't necessarily want to lose the additional affordable. That's just my thought. It's like I'm open to hearing what you're saying as like finding ways to incentivize the affordable, but I don't want to necessarily lose it either. Councilman Van Grack.
My concern is similar, I think, to the mayor and yours, what you're addressing. I mean, I love us focusing on MPDUs in green space, but we've gone from a situation where we are now, because we talked about combining this core and transition, or the transition and edge. So whether we're core and transition, we're talking about 50 feet bonus. But now we've taken the bonus height and the same requirement of the increase of the MPDUs that was 50 is now 35. And then the green is now 15. So to get the 50, you've now got to do a lot of extra things that previously was just the MPDU affordable housing. And I am all for this idea of incentivizing towards bonus, but just as you said, the green space is just one story, whereas MPDUs is just 3 stories. If you're actually building a large building, and we're talking about, for example, 20 feet, an extra 1 story of 20 stories, an extra 1 story of a 20-story, that's not a big incentive. An extra 3 stories of a 20-story building, again, not a huge incentive. And so we were talking previously about what realistically is a marketplace incentive. I think 1 story and 3 stories is a big difference between a potential 5 stories as it was for just 1 incentive previously.
So are you in favor of allowing more affordable and taking up the whole height allowance, or?
I mean, I have to tell you, if I had to look at it, I'd actually say, let's stick with the MPDU 50 that was from the original April draft. But then also, why not include a 15 for also the green? So we're talking about a 65, right? Because then we're truly incentivizing the MPDUs. But then if they also want to go forward with a green space for an extra story, that's realistic as well.
I think that goes back to what we allow for base heights and how, like, at some point, are you getting to 200? So
I'm
yeah.
posing that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Jackson.
Thanks to you, Madam Mayor. I understand why the Planning Commission did a green space bonus density, but our focus is on housing and affordable housing. So I would be loath to take down the number of feet that we give for doing affordable housing in PDUs. So even though my heart is with the Planning Commission and the green space, I really I think we should just focus on affordable housing bonus densities.
Just a clarification, is it possible for them to get the full amount through, to write it so they could take the full bonus height through just affordability?
As it's written now, no, but we could modify it to write that.
Okay, so
Yep.
that would be, I think
That's an option.
I'm hearing some desire to understand what that might look like. There are some buildings that are just going to say, I just want to do green, so I don't want to necessarily remove that, but I do
to comment on my colleagues, like I do want to really incentivize affordable. Councilmember Fulton, then Councilmember Valeri.
So I'll just be brief and like really clear on the way I'm thinking about this and what would love to see whatever information comes back. In the core area, what we would have is a by right height of 200. I would have in the edge area a by right height of 100. So that's 50%. I would then add a bonus height in the core of 50 for affordable housing. And I would add a bonus height of 25 in the edge for housing. So that's, again, half of it. I'm just looking for consistency, like come down half. Like that's what I would do, focusing on the housing. I would also agree or be open to like what it would look like, what kind of incentives would be created to add in addition to that for green initiatives. But I agree with whomever said, Councilmember Jackson, that our climate goals and our green initiatives are real. They're a focus of ours. We should be addressing them in our climate action plan. If there are things we think we want in our building code that is more green, we should put it there. But the focus here in the bonus density should be on housing. But I would be open to going above what I just said for the 250 and 125 for green. Did that make sense?
Thank you. Councilmember Valeri.
If you could go back to the slide with the nice little chart on the bonus. My colleagues are really good at doing this off the top of their head. I'm a visual learner, so it's very helpful. So given that we're only looking at the core and the edge, is there a discussion? I guess I'm struggling with.
Are we looking at core and transition? Because now we're all potentially going to have all core and transition versus edge, right?
No, it's all edge.
It would be all edge and core, right?
I think we can call it whatever we want to call it, but
Yeah.
what this body has discussed and without doing a straw poll seems to be consensus that we're treating everything in the pink, whether it's the light pink or the dark pink, the same way. We can call that however we need to call
However
it.
we want it. Okay. No, I think that makes total sense. I appreciated what the Planning Commission was trying to do with the different calculations. And I know that in some part, at least to me, some of the green space discussion was kind of around the idea of looking at additional environmental amenities and not just simply having, fee in lieu or a bunch of trees put somewhere and half of them die, but actually having some sort of a community benefit, a community environmental benefit. And I totally get that. I think sometimes when I go back and forth on this, the green incentives, it's a struggle because when we start looking at buildings where there is no space, like we're looking at, down the road, in the future, and there literally won't be a space to have even a pocket park, right? How could we incentivize green space, and how do we look at that creatively? I think that's separate though from what we're looking at as far as bonus height. If we are going to get more MPDUs, I think that we truly do have to incentivize that, because I think sometimes like green amenities can benefit the investors as well, rightly so, but it's harder to incentivize making more affordable housing. So that's kind of where I'm landing in my very meandering sort of way, but I see where the Planning Commission was coming from, and I really appreciated the time and energy and thoughtfulness that they put into this. I think that we can always just streamline it and making it easier to even navigate for potential developers down the road.
Thank you. So I just also note that there is at least one developer that you know of, that you flagged that is going to provide green space and park, right? 414, 416.
So yeah, and all developments right now are required to provide both what we call public use space and open space. There's requirements, it varies depending on the zone of what they are. Most of the time it's 5 or 10% of public use, 5 or 10% of open space. They have slightly different definitions. So all projects are required to provide something. So this would be 5% additional beyond what is already required. So we do have some, like our folks at 414 and 416, that are choosing to do that anyways. They're going above and beyond. Oftentimes we do have folks that are going above and beyond. Oftentimes, depending on the size of the site and its limitations, we have folks that if they need, I'm making this number up, but if they need to provide 5,000 square feet, they have provided 5,001 square feet and, you know, nothing more than that.
Yeah, so this would, having something would allow them to get additional height opportunities for that property, correct?
Something above their current requirements.
Yeah, because the 2 parks is above their requirements, is that not right? Or is the 2 parks that you have listed, is that within their requirements?
That's above their requirement.
That's above. So we would be allowing them to get something extra for providing that public amenity.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I'm generally supportive of helping those who want to do good, but I as I said, as my colleagues have shared, I want also there to be an option where people can get the full height through affordable. Councilmember Shaw, I don't think you had a chance to speak on this one.
I would, for this, since, you know, we have the goal around affordable housing, I would say housing only. And I look forward, again, to receive the recommendations that you have. And I think there are other opportunities to have the alternative green space. And there's, you know, I think, you know, there's a lot of buildings that do creative things like rooftop green space, and still allowing the housing. But I would definitely do housing only.
Thank you. Can I go to Dr. Miles? Just I don't think he's spoken yet on this.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would emphasize or prioritize housing. I'm not necessarily opposed to green space. Again, my priority would be to give the building heights primarily for housing. That's all.
Thank you. Councilman Van Grack.
And just to reiterate, I also would, like I said before, I think if we're going to prioritize something and incentivize, it should be housing. And I know we're kind of honing in on, you know, other numbers because I know that's part of what you were looking at. And I think the half situation that Councilmember Fulton put forward, where it's the base height in the whole edge area of 100 with a 25 incentive solely for the MPDU housing versus the 200 base in the core with a 50 incentive solely for housing outside of what the mayor had put forward in that corridor area along 355, which would be a larger area that could go forward. I think that, you know, as my colleagues have said, our priority here is about affordable housing. While I definitely think we need to prioritize the green space, I think if we're going to actually put forward an incentive here and increase the potential number of MPDUs, solely focusing on that incentive within the bonus is the best way for us to have that incentive come to fruition.
Next question.
Moving along here, parking, another very popular topic of conversation. So we've shifted from eliminating within the 1/2 and quarter mile radii to eliminating throughout the planning area. You've seen this map before showing the difference. The blue is what was proposed in April. The red is what would be proposed now with the entire planning area. One thing I didn't mention earlier that is important to note is we're talking about changing those requirements only within the boundaries of planning area 1. So to the extent that a 1/2 mile or a quarter mile radius extends into planning area 2, East Rockville, or planning area 4, West End, we're only applying it to the town center itself. We've talked about some of our reasons for and rationale for eliminating these requirements. And so our question to you is, how do we want to handle this? Do we want to continue to move forward with the elimination of minimums throughout, or would this body like to see something else?
Can I ask a question? Oh, Councilman Miles.
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. I was just going to opine on the question. Looking at the data from average parking use, I think most of the garages, or all of them that I got data from the city, had occupancy less than 50%. I heard from staff about the amount it costs per parking space, and given the proximity of Metro, I would be in favor of eliminating the parking minimum. That's all.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question to follow up on Councilman Miles' question? The utilization rates, was that taken, what's the time period? Is it daytime and nighttime? Because I know daytime has more parking than nighttime because there's commercial uses.
I have an email out to Morgard right now to come up with that. They simply sent us a spreadsheet that has various months and dates and what the average occupancy is, but I don't know exactly how they calculated that. So that's something we can bring back to you for December 16th.
And is there any forecasting on what will be? Because we do know that Trader Joe's is going to take over the top level and majority of the bottom level of that parking lot on that side. And now we don't have CVS, which did have a lot of traffic flowing through there. Is there a forecasted version of that?
Not to my knowledge, but we can ask that question and we can find out.
Okay, that would be helpful, just to have the information. Councilman Van Grack?
So I've been actually wrestling with this question a lot because I think it's an important question. First, directly around the transit areas. So we're talking directly around, and I actually, at least for right now, focusing on directly around the Metro Center. I am for eliminating the parking minimums, but that's in the direct area, and I'm talking about the Metro Center area and the adjacent areas. For the larger areas, I have to tell you, I'm torn back and forth. Number one, I understand everything that you've been saying and the data that you've provided to us thus far, talking about the necessity of decreasing our parking requirements and therefore eliminating the minimums to increase our residential density and encourage residential development, which this council has absolutely been for. That being said, I do have a worry with regard to what we're talking about with this significant increase of units and also potentially filling a lot of those retail areas, such as what we've talked about Trader Joe's. We've got the former Gordon Biersch area that used to attract a lot of people that nobody's going to right now. I'd like to ask, because I know that even in your presentation here, you talked about some data and studies that weren't necessarily presented to us yet. I'd like to request, and if the city manager is okay with this, a potential briefing this week to specifically go over that data. I'm not necessarily opposed to eliminating parking minimums, but I have concerns about doing so when we're talking about this larger area and this larger increase of residential density significantly and what impact that could have on our economic development as a whole, which I think we've got to consider along with when we're talking about residential density. So to the extent there can be a briefing to go over some of that data before I kind of formulate my opinion and answer this question, I'd like to get some of those data, and I can go over with staff a little more detail because I've taken notes within your presentation of what those studies would be and the staff's rationale and basis, not only within those studies and the data. I'd like to see what Morgard says in response to their data, but also go over very specifically what Montgomery County did with regard to their specific centers, such as Bethesda and Silver Spring, and the impact of those decisions on those developments and the utilization of the parking that was available there compared to what the parking available is currently and potentially forecast in Town Center.
Thank you. Councilmember Fulton, then Councilmember Valeri.
I'm in favor of eliminating the parking minimums throughout the town center area. That being said, I do agree that you gave a really high level of some of the really compelling reasons to do that. I think I've dug in a lot on this. I've followed what Montgomery County did, and I thought that it was really well supported. So it would help to know not only what current and projected is for Rockville as my colleagues look at this, but like what's happening around the country and what the impacts are, like when you're looking 20 years down the road, like what are we building for? So I think it's really helpful to share that data. One thing that you said that I would maybe hope for a little bit more color on right now, because it did concern me. It was originally concerning me, was about, you said that the requirement to build parking spaces is a cost that often gets passed down to the resident or like the renter in this case. I had a concern that if there's not enough parking spaces, renting those parking spaces for renters would then be a cost. So what's your thought on how I understood you to say that balances out, that it is more cost goes to the renter when there's required parking. Is that the conclusion?
Yes, and.
Okay.
So the way that I would describe it is the situation that we have costs that are passed on to whoever the end user, whether that's a renter, whether that's the purchase of a home, whether that's the grocery store, whoever it is that's occupying that space. Those costs are passed along when there is an overabundance of parking, that there's no revenue being generated on it, but the bill is due at the end of the day, right? I have to pay down, my financing on that. So regardless of if that garage is packed full capacity or there is not a single person in there, my bill is the same at the end of the day. When there's that shortage, that's when the cost gets passed on. If something is operating at full capacity and it's revenue generating, a lot of times we see, and I think Town Center, this is true too, most of our housing developments that have structured parking are still charging the renter some fee in order to have access to that parking, but that is in turn generating a revenue that pays down the cost of that. So I think one way to look at it, because you're absolutely right, if we build too much, there's no revenue coming in, that cost gets passed on to the renter. If we build it, there's a cost to access it, that cost also gets passed on the renter. So I hear you there. I would say to view it the similar way that we may view like tolls for like toll roads or bridges or gas taxes, of people who utilize those public infrastructure do pay into that system, and they pay more into that system than someone who doesn't use that infrastructure. People will say that that's a very equitable way to do it. Some people will say that's a terrible way to do that. That's not for me to opine on right now, but I would say the concept of paying for parking should be viewed kind of similarly. Of it costs money to build, it is infrastructure, the user should be paying that rather than someone who doesn't own a vehicle and their rent is going up to make up for the lack of parking revenue.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Councilmember Valeri?
I have many thoughts on this topic. And I've been sitting here and leading into this meeting trying to organize the many thoughts that I've had along the way. I live in the shadow of a almost 90% unused metro parking structure that outside of Twin Brook Metro that was put up and is underutilized and is actually attracting crime and other nefarious elements. And I see the missed potential in having such a huge investment in parking. And I don't know what their rationale was, but it was a missed opportunity, frankly. And that's the struggle that I have. I also know that I come at it from the experience of having a loved one like others on this dais who are in need of handicap parking. And I don't think that that's ever, and I want to just be clear, however we decide on this is not going to eliminate handicap parking in Rockville Town Center. And I just want to put a huge bolding underline on that topic. And if there is accessibility issues as of right now, that we look at solutions to it, but the solution is to not look at eliminating parking minimums. I think it's a different issue. I think the other issue that I have is my 2 points broadly, and you mentioned this before, is that this is a long-term plan, much like the comprehensive master plan was. These things are not going to happen tomorrow, and market forces are going to affect the decisions that developers make as far as parking goes. I joked around with some of my colleagues. I wish I had a crystal ball to know what the trend lines are going to be. None of us do. What we see right now and what we feel right now may not be the experience of how people need parking 10, 20 years from now, 5 years from now. We may be looking at other locations for BRT stations. So is that map even going to be relevant once we get to the point where the BRT is actually coming into fruition? So, those things can shift and change. And so let's say we really have to have a parking minimum here, and then an additional BRT station is built, and then we wouldn't have really needed it there. I think that we have to look at it in terms of can't believe I'm saying this, in terms of the market forces and what is actually what the market is calling for. And I think that developers that at the heart want to make a profit are going to look at, these variety of factors and how they determine what the parking needs are. They're going to want, if there's a residential component of it, they're going to want to make their property attractive to people to live or rent there, or to have a business there, because otherwise they're not making any money on their investment. And the other thing that struck me is that if we go ahead with any sort of concession on no parking minimum, are we then in any way, shape, or form still competitive with the county, who's just eliminated all their parking minimums? If I am a developer and I'm coming in and, the county, they eliminated their parking minimums, and Rockville kind of did, but not in these areas. I always want Rockville to be the most attractive option for investment, for development, and which, if any of our county colleagues are watching, which might mean doing better than the county in this way, or at a bare minimum doing at the same level as the county, so that all things are being equal. So I get it. I struggle, and I know the challenges that a lot of people face who really do rely on having an automobile and needing it and having it be a necessity. But this is not a plan for right this second. So I guess I would say, and however we're going to deliberate on this, are we reacting to what we're hearing right this second, or are we thinking with any sort of future forecasting to make this the most competitive, attractive area? Those are kind of some of my thoughts broadly on this. I'm always a big fan of talking more, in the coming time, as Councilmember Van Grack stated, but I did want to get some of these thoughts out now, because it is something that I've thought through. Also thinking through the number of amazing developments that have come in who have been granted a parking waiver. And, and wouldn't it be great if we made the process even easier by not having the parking minimum, so that they wouldn't have to go through the waiver process, thus easing the ability for some of these developments to come online. So I just wanted to share some of my thoughts with my colleagues broadly on what I'm contemplating on this one.
Thank you. I just have a couple quick things. I wanted to build on, we actually have gotten some good public benefit things through the parking waiver process. Additional green, additional affordable, Twin Brook art, things that, well, I'm just saying we said, okay, you want this, we need this. So it was a negotiating tool. So I'm not saying we do that going forward, because I think the bonus density will get to that. And some of the building standards will get to that. But I do want to just note that we have allowed some parking reductions, and it was a really good process that also allowed us to negotiate to allow developments to happen, but also to speak up for our residents and get additional public good. So, and I wanted to comment on the Twin Brook garage, because I know that's out there in the community, and people are like, what is that? My understanding is that WMATA had negotiated with a developer, the parking lot was built, and then the housing never came. So that is a long history that planning can get back to us on, but I recall that was kind of the housing developer, yes, they had negotiated with WMATA to build a parking structure. There was something happened, and then something happened with the development, never came through.
Yeah.
So it should not have been that way. But here we are. Maybe when we get to the Twin Brook Metro work, we'll be able to get that fixed. This is something where I feel like we need more information. I wrote down some notes as you were speaking in the overall presentation. You noted that there was a study that showed that developers will lower rents. I have spoken to some developers to ask the question. They love no parking minimums, to be honest, but I have never heard someone say, I'm going to lower the market rate rent at this time. I just haven't heard it in this area. They're going to charge what they can. So if you have studies to the contrary, I would love to see them because I do know that in general, they will charge what the market will allow. And in the initial comprehensive plan, when we had talked about parking reductions, there was some tie-in to include an incentive bonus for a reduction in parking to get more housing for seniors and more housing for more affordable housing. Now that's just given away. So I would like to really understand, are we going to get those things without requiring them to do it? You also mentioned in Montgomery County, there were properties that developed as much or lower. I know when we had our briefing, you said there weren't any properties at the time. So I want to know which of those, where are those properties? What are they? So we can just have some of that background.
Yes.
And I don't need it now, but I
Yep.
just would love to see.
We have
that
them.
before
We have a
next week.
chart from the county. We could
That
provide
would be fantastic. I think that is super helpful. I did want to also note that Rockville Town Center is, in addition to, we want to make sure we're supporting a very strong residential area, but it's also a regional hub. We plan regional events. We plan, we want to see people coming in from other places as they visit Crown, as they visit Pike and Rose, as they visit Rio, to come here as well. And so I want to be mindful that we don't necessarily do anything where we lose that capacity to have it really be a regional hub that people can come. I also want to be mindful of the lived experiences of renters. I know I lived in a building that did not have parking. I know that I went to a city that I had to pay $100 to park. I know that renters are paying $100 per month in some places for parking and $200 in some places $50. So I was just curious about the supply demand, as my colleague Councilman Fulton raised, of if we have less parking, will that then create more costs for renters in the long run because they can just charge more because the market says there's not enough supply. So because that's an argument that has been used on housing in general. Does that also apply to parking costs? I want to note that there are renters who work at night. I would love to see everyone taking Metro. I've lived in a city that I had access to Metro 24/7. That is not the case in this region. And so you have healthcare workers, people who work in retail, all kinds of jobs that require the grave hours of working late at night. And sometimes they may, as you noted, have to have a car. So I know that the removing parking minimum doesn't mean that there'll be no parking. But I would like to see if developers, even if there's no parking minimum, have to come up with a parking plan so that they're showing prompting them to be considerate of the users of that building. I know that there are at least 3 buildings in the region that did not provide adequate parking. The market didn't work that time and the buildings went back to the bank. So I'm just trying to, find a way that finds a compromise on both sides so that at least we're prompting that. And I'd like the parking plan, not saying that they have to have parking on that site, but they have to think about their residents or their consumers. I'm particularly interested in this for people with disabilities. There are some public parking spaces on the street, but they're not a lot. And if we're adding this level of additional housing, then there will be more. And as you noted, I think there was a number like 20% or something along the lines of town center does attract a large number of people with disabilities. We have to think about them. And as we grow, we have to make sure we have infrastructure to support and be inclusive to everyone. The other piece I wanted to ask about is if we do reduce parking minimums, how does that play into our EV strategy plan? And will people who live in multifamily buildings still have adequate access to EV charging? If the state of Maryland is going to no new gas sales in 2035, then we just need to make sure that we have opportunities for people to be able to charge. And I do have serious concern of people who live in multifamily that don't have that option now. Those are some of my initial comments. I know that, I don't know if you have any comments that you want to make to me. If not, I know Councilmember Jackson also has comments.
So just one quick one that you brought up, as well as Councilwoman Valeri, of if we eliminate parking minimums, what's the impact on handicapped parking? So there is a state law that still requires that, even in areas where there is no parking minimum. So state law is that there is 1 handicapped parking space required for every 25 dwelling units. So while the requirement on paper might be 0, if it's a 100-unit development, they must find a way to provide 4 handicapped parking units on site.
Thank you. Can I ask a question? Since you said that, we know there's a building that's being developed in Rockville Town Center that is planned for affordable, which is great. They are not planning any parking on site, is what I've heard. So would they then would they be required then to make available those handicap parking spaces across the street?
So yeah, there's requirements about if it's not provided on site, there has to be within X distance of a handicapped accessible entrance to the building.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Jackson, then Councilmember Shaw.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. So first of all, I want to echo what several of my colleagues have already said about people with disabilities. I mean, the town center is really frequented by people with disabilities, and we have Main Street right here in the town center. So just keeping it in mind is really important as we look at what to do about parking. I also would echo what the mayor was talking about the parking plan. Regardless of whether we have minimums or not, I think it's a good idea to have people, developers, look at the parking plan and really think about how residents are going to be impacted, whether there's parking or not. You know, it's really been a great discussion about the data and about, you know, what we have, but also, you know, I think many of my colleagues were right in that more data is always useful. And I think the idea about having a briefing to really dig into the data is a great one. So I would echo also, I would hope I would take advantage of a briefing. You go back to page 43, as the prior slide. I wanted to ask, sorry, was it there?
We have a slightly different version of this slide earlier. Are you referring to something that looks like this but is not exactly like this?
Yeah, so,
Yes. Give us a
I
second.
wrote it down. You said part of the reason you were combating the existing excess of parking. Yeah, right there. Rationale for limiting requirements. So part of the reason was combating the existing excess of parking. I just want you, can you expound on that a little bit?
So we know from our occupancy number, when I say this, I'm referring to garages A, B, and C, the Morguard operated but city financed garages there. We know that for many of those garages, occupancy is as low as 18%. I don't think any of them had an average occupancy of above 50%. So when we're talking about, I don't remember the exact number, let's say 1,800 parking spaces, if only 50% of them are utilized on any day, that's 900 parking spaces that we have sitting empty right there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think we do need to get the daytime, because I will just tell you, you said not any of them. I am constantly at the one by the old Dawson space, and it is quite well utilized. So I just, maybe it's because they're counting in nighttime hours, like
We
overnight.
can confirm that with
Yeah,
Morguard.
I think that's
Yep.
really important.
Yep, not a
And
problem.
My last point is I would want to see the data. And I know there's been questions from the dais about whether rents are actually reduced when there's no parking. But 17% is a pretty large percentage of rent in terms of reduction. So, I mean, that's pretty compelling. And I would just like to see the data. I would like to understand a little bit more where those numbers come from.
Sure.
But for me, I mean, it's huge in making the final decision.
Yeah, and it should be noted, that's one study that showed 17%. That's not a guarantee that anything is going to be like that, but we're happy to share that data.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Shaw, and then Councilmember Miles, and then Councilmember Fulton.
So I have a few questions. I know that in the plan it said that you applied an equity analysis throughout, and I was questioning some of the areas of what the impacts would be. Parking is one of them. And I was particularly thinking about, as we're increasing our affordable housing, are we excluding folks by eliminating the parking minimums, particularly people with disabilities? I know
you noted that there was a law around 1 out of 25 spaces, but there is a higher concentration of people with disabilities in town center. So people with disabilities, also younger families that have kids, are we excluding them as well? Because we don't know the units, right, at this point. So that's a big question mark. Also, people who may work non-traditional hours that can't take the metro back and forth to work. Also, people who use their car for work, like if they're selling things or if they have a landscape business or what have you. I know that in Thrive 2050, when they did a focus group on lower income working class families, one of the main issues outside of their concern about being displaced was parking and needing parking. So I just wonder if how that social equity was applied, that lens was applied to parking, and what the impact is of some of the most vulnerable groups. So that's one question. I would also ask about that 17%, where that study was done. Was it done in Montgomery County?
It was not local to Montgomery County.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about that 17%. I would also say too, we want our town center to grow and increase. I know during the tree lighting, it was just one event, I decided to drive, and it took me about half an hour to find a parking space. And that's just one event. So I am and I know that we're also planning to increase the number of events. That was something that I believe that was one of the takeaways that you had from your community engagement was to increase the events. I also just question comparing town center to the Rio and to Pike and Rose in terms of parking. I have experienced less of a problem finding parking in those areas in comparison to town center. And that's just my own personal experience. I'm not sure based on data, but it would be interesting to see that. And then for the parking plan, I do think this is a good idea. My only question would be, there's a large turnover with tenants based on the high cost of living. You know, your next rent increase, you may or may not be there. We have no idea, unlike the county. And so if we're asking developers to anticipate who needs parking, I mean, I think that would change regularly based on the turnover with tenants. So overall, I just have a lot of questions on how this would work based on our growth, based on social equity, based on comparing it to other areas. And, you know, I think this is a very, I do think it's definitely worth looking into, because I know that the space can be used for more housing, but I'm also just concerned. And I will also say, as a tenant in town center, if I pay $100, there's $100 per car where I live. And so if there's less parking, you know, the supply was used as an argument in terms of housing. Although, yeah, the supply side was used in terms of housing. But if there is less of a supply, does that mean that tenants are now going to pay $150? And bottom line, that does increase rent.
Thank you. Councilmember Fulton. No, Dr. Miles first, because he hasn't spoken yet, and then I'll go to Councilmember Fulton, then Valeri.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought I made my comments earlier with regard to parking. They haven't changed in terms of looking at, as I mentioned, the current utilization, wherever we get the numbers from. I'm okay with doing away with parking requirements at the present moment.
Thank you. Do you have any comments on the parking plan, or you don't feel like you need it at all? Just clarity.
I'm good with staff's proposal.
Great. Councilmember Fulton.
Man, Dr. Miles is really showing me up on being brief today. Let me see if I can be really brief.
Just added 10 seconds.
Dang it. I wanted one thought, and then when we look at the utilization, it helps to look at the town square apartments, but I'd also be curious. I don't have no idea if this is true, but I'm hearing from people in the community that like there's parking lots all over in this area that are like being rented by car dealerships because they're never used. So like as much data as we can get on the full scope of parking, I know that's hard to come by, but to know how much there is in excess or not. The other thing I will just offer, I am in favor of no parking minimums. I'm interested in exploring the idea if there's a way to, without creating a hindrance to potential developers, incentivizing like, hey, have you thought about this for us to look at? So whether that's a parking plan or whatever, I think it's worth exploring what we can do there. Yeah.
I will note that just to help answer your question, because I know some people weren't here, there was the Choice Building was renting parking space in Morguard property, and when COVID hit and they moved, that them using that parking space went away. There was an issue in the Lincoln Park neighborhood where people were parking Teslas all over the place, and it was really causing a neighborhood issue. And so we connected them, and now they're using that, the dealership is using that space. So I just want to flag that. But that since that happened, there also was the loss of CVS. They had space too, with loss of CVS, loss of Gordon Biersch, loss of Pandora. So there's some fallouts from the pandemic that I think are a factor. Thank you. Councilmember Valeri.
Yes, thank you. It goes back to the EV question. And I first want to preface it by saying that to a certain extent, as I'm looking at the census data and the neighborhood with which I live has the least access to an automobile, that in and of itself is an equity issue because there are many people who cannot afford to own one car, let alone two, and must find a way, unfortunately, to transit to and from work. So I don't want to discount the needs of individuals who do not utilize nor own, nor even have access to a car because they exist within the city. And I think that their experiences are just as valid as people who drive all around. I'm thinking through this on the EV question as well, in that we're sitting here, it's almost 2025. We all thought we would be in flying cars, and this plan needs to push us toward the future. So future focused, we may see more things like we have here at City Hall, which is on-street EV charging stations. That might be more the regular. Maybe we see things that are the traditional gas station is really going to be half EV charging stations and half gas stations. We don't know, but we have to allow for the greatest amount of flexibility and not just react to the right this second. And I just want to always put a pin on that. As far as do multifamily buildings as it stands right now have adequate EV charging station access? Because, you know, is that something that we should be looking at? Is there generally an inventory of parking in and around? I'm kind of giggling a little bit about the Choice Hotels thing because there has been for the longest time that long strip parking lot that is supposed to be for metro parking. I get that, but a lot of people use it for a lot of things. It would make a lovely park. I like that idea a lot. But there's a lot of options for parking. And then my final point on all of this is desirability of amenities of an area can often assuage all concerns about parking. I think we see that in Bethesda. I think we see it in some other Chevy Chase where there isn't a lot of parking options, but that doesn't make them any less desirable for both retailers and for housing. So just another point to put out there. But Yeah, I was just kind of sitting here. Our whole framework on what an EV station being a parking spot might completely shift in the next 10 years, maybe sooner. We don't know. And then where will we be when we've addressed an issue based on right this second as opposed to future thinking and thought processes?
Thank you. So I think you've heard from all of us. You've gotten a couple of research questions. I think I heard a majority on just what could a parking plan look like. Not saying that we're going to do that, but just to bring that up as an exploration. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Just really quickly, I think you heard we're relying on others to get some of this parking data, particularly some of the more discrete data points, and we'll do our best to get that. But because we're relying on others, I'm not sure I can set up briefings right away just because we need the data first. If I can't get the data with the team and set up the briefings, then we'll bring all of that to your work session next Monday, just to make sure everybody sees it.
All right, and if there are mention of studies, that would also be helpful, because this is, this is different than what was in the comp plan. The comp plan said incentivize affordable and a senior with parking reductions. This moved to elimination, which some people are supportive of. We just want to make sure why did staff make the recommendation? I know that was probably just following the county, but if we are trying to encourage more affordable, what was the rationale not tying some of these reductions to affordable? So you've heard a couple of research questions from us, and I think that would be helpful to get that before we make decisions. Councilman Van Grack.
Yeah, and just to emphasize, regardless of the data or studies or information we might be looking for, to the extent there's any studies that were referenced by staff today or as a basis for it, if we can get it ahead of time, if they've got it, if we could get it this week before any briefing, even if we're holding off the information as a whole until either later this week or at next week's work session, it would be appreciated.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you. I know you have a couple of questions. Can you show us what the next question is, and can we think about it and maybe take a bathroom break or a bio break?
Yes. So the next question is asking if there is support by this body to modify the language in 5.1.1. This is to address the engineering concern that's coming up with the bus rapid transit station along 355.
Thank you. And you have a couple more slides after this and then more. Okay.
They should be quicker ones, I think.
Okay. All right. Let's take a 5-minute break and come back. Is that all right, everybody? All right. Perfect. Thank you. Welcome back, Rockville. Today is December 9th, 2024. We're going to reconvene meeting 28-24. We were with our esteemed planning and development staff talking about Rockville Town Center Master Plan, and there are a couple of areas that we are going to continue on. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. So we're picking up here at Bus Rapid Transit. So you can see on this slide the language that's currently in the draft plan that's being specific about the exact location of the BRT station. And staff are proposing that we modify that to say we want it to be as close as possible. We want to minimize pedestrian crossings, but not dictate the exact location of that station.
Can you clarify when you said what was before and what is potentially now in terms of what the county wants? Can you say it in front of buildings, just to be clear? Which building?
Yes.
Was it
So
what building were you thinking?
north of East Middle would be in front of the Choice Hotel building, and then south of East Middle would be in front of 255 Rockville Pike.
And you prefer, can you go back to the previous slide? So you wanted it to be...
Yeah, originally we wanted it to be south in front of 255 Rockville Pike, and I believe this body several years ago also said they wanted it south, with the thought being there's only one leg of the road that needs to be crossed to get to the metro station. You would have to cross 355, but you would already be on the proper side of East Middle Lane. You wouldn't have two crossings.
Okay.
And then it's just with the more engineered, at the time that decision was made, the design drawings were not completed, and now we're along further in the process and they're realizing there's some issues there.
Yeah, at that time too, there wasn't clarity on ownership of that. It was going into auction, so a lot has changed.
Correct.
And I think that does require a frontage. That's the frontage to the building mainly now. So I'm okay with this. I also know that the state wants something, the county wants something. I think there's stormwater management and there's at least one other issue. So there's a lot already in front of that 255 property that various jurisdictions of government are demanding. So it'd be hard to fit BRT. So I'm okay with this. Councilman Valeri.
I am okay with this, but in the grand tradition of Madam Mayor, I will put but I would like the county to work in tandem with us to urge the state to make the crossings actually less deadly. If we could somehow be like, okay, we got this, to the state, okay, understand completely. However, the initial thought process was because this road is deadly, and with no exaggeration am I saying that, then I'm totally okay. So it would really just be adding in with a shared goal of making the crossing at Middle Lane and 355 the safest possible for all residents of Rockville.
Can I ask one follow-up question? Was there any possibility to put it closer to where the pedestrian bridge is? Like not directly in front of 255, was there another option along that?
I don't know how detailed it's been looked at, but the problem is that the pedestrian bridge is not actually accessed from MD 355. So you can put it under the overpass of the bridge, but then you're still having to go around to come up through Promenade Park in order to access that bridge. That was the concern there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just trying to find ways to get close, not necessarily just to the on-street parking, but to the pedestrian bridge and provide more utilization there, because it is probably the safest way to cross. And is that intersection one of the, you don't have to answer this, but staff can come back. Is that intersection one of the 11 intersections that we got a grant to look at to make safer?
I believe that it is. I can confirm with DPW staff, but I believe that it is.
Okay, all right, thank you. Councilmember Shaw.
I also agree with this, with the proposed staff edit. I also need IT help as well.
Can we have some IT help? We'll continue with the meeting, but feel free to come and help. Councilmember Shaw. Yeah, thank you. Councilman Van Grack.
I was going to add that I support the staff recommendation for the change.
Councilmember Fulton.
I support the staff recommendation for a change.
Thank you. How about this? Is there anyone who doesn't support the staff? No. No. Go ahead. All right. I see yes. And Dr. Miles? Yes. We're straw polling yes. Councilman Valeri.
Can I also straw poll the idea of including assistance in advocating with SHA to make the existing pedestrian crossing safer? I don't see it as a negative, but I don't want to lose that, okay, this would have been ideal. We're trying to minimize crossings. Okay, forget it. You had any crossing is okay. We want to be able to work well with others, but we also want to use any tool that we can to actually make it safer for pedestrians to cross.
Thank you. Can you go back to the previous slide?
So to Councilwoman Valeri's point, I do want to point out that we do have an action. It's action 4.1.3 that's talking about advancing the safety audits at certain intersections. It does identify this intersection. And then action 4.1.4 says pending results of audit, coordinate with SHA to redesign and reconstruct. Never mind, that's a different action. Just 4.1.3.
Are you okay with that?
I am totally okay with that. This is in part also being asked of us by the county, and the county is looking at these stations. So that's cool and all. County, let's work together to move SHA on making it safer. I feel like just being a little explicit here may be helpful, but I would defer to hearing from my colleagues.
City Manager.
Yeah, Mayor, I don't think anybody would disagree on that. We'll make sure we can add a little bit of language to understand Councilmember Valeri's intent very much. So, thank you.
Thank you. And has staff looked at the pedestrian bridge area on either side?
I don't believe we have just yet. We'll take a peek.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving along. We are now into parks. So as we shared earlier, it's a little hard to see on this map. I apologize. There's some stars over the area where we're proposing some new parks. The red star in the middle being that park that is not currently in the draft plan that staff would like to add. So the parks currently proposed are on the 200 block of Monroe Street, 301 Hungerford Drive, improvements to the Unity Bridge, and 260 North Washington Street, with the park that we would like to add being in the vicinity of 414 and 416 Hungerford Drive. So with that, our questions to you, is there support for adding that action, addressing the parks along the extension of Maryland Avenue at 414, 416 Hungerford Drive? And if there are any other comments or concerns about parks, we would be interested in hearing those now.
Is there any drawback to including it? The developers already said they'll give it
They've
to
already
us.
said they're doing it. I think it's a very easy win for us. It gives us a little bit more leverage until things are signed on the dotted line. I don't see any downside.
Then just so we can just be quick, is everyone okay with this? Yes, I see one question, Councilman Van Grack.
The only question I had is, I think this is great. I don't have an objection. Was there any thought with regard to doing some type of park or some type of even partial utilization of the property at the very, very, very north end of the town center where there is an existing gas station, and a gas station that kind of is shown at the entrance, but potentially a tip could be, or even part of that, utilized at some sort of either wayfinding or entrance notation. Was there any discussion of that at all, or? I'm just kind of, because I love the idea that you're talking about that one gas station and utilizing that whole area, which is a wonderful area for a park. But there's also this idea of this central area that people are coming to where all they're seeing is kind of a gas station as opposed to that frontage, which really could be used as a showcase area because you're entering the town center.
There was no specific talks about that gas station in terms of putting it into a park. The plan does call for wayfinding signage, which could potentially be incorporated, but it does not specify that location.
So, I mean, but we haven't looked, and again, I'm not necessarily, I mean, obviously, using that whole area as a parkland might be difficult because you really would have to cross the street to get there in any utilization. So I understand, but potentially part of the front of that area used into like, and I guess we're talking about a very, very small parkland that also could be utilized as wayfinding. That would just be my only thought, if you're asking for other areas of parks or utilization.
For some of the parks that you're thinking of, how would you make them safe in case a ball rolls, or, you know, I just want to make sure that we're thinking about safety. If these are for children, I know that there's some parks, like Veterans Park is not necessarily a children's park. It's kind of more of a view, beautiful view. But if these are parks, active parks that we're trying to make, how do you make, I know I've gone to other cities where they actually create some kind of barrier
to make it safe, but what do you have in mind?
Yeah, so we haven't designed any of them and we haven't programmed any of them at this point because until we have that property, we can't force that to be a park. So that would be kind of determined through the process. My guess is Recreation and Parks would be heavily involved in that, looking at their strategic plan and the needs assessments of different parts. So nothing has been designed. There's a ton of things that you can do with landscaping, with fencing, with other design elements, but we don't have any specifics.
Okay, I'm generally okay with, well, I definitely want more parks. But I want to make sure they're safe. So that's my caveat is like, are these the safest places to have parks? There is a gas station on Hungerford that burned down. And I know that last term we asked periodically, what's up with that? Do you know what's going on with that? I don't know if this is exactly in this planning area, but.
I think I know what you're talking about. I'm not familiar with the latest on there, and I would have to look up to make sure it is in the planning area.
I think in general,
You're
it's just
thinking it's near Fresh Baguette? Is that?
not far. Yeah, maybe it's just a plug of ask what's going on with that again. Because it's been sitting there for over, I don't know how many, it's been multiple years.
We can certainly do some digging on that. I think it is within the planning area. If it's the one I'm thinking of, it is.
Yeah, initially there was a desire from mayor and council to look at, like, could there be housing or could there be something else there? It just seems like, are we being proactive about what is possible on places? Are we just waiting for them to decide? And whenever they come to us, we listen. I would like to see that we check in on these things. Okay. Councilmember Valeri.
Totally supportive of calling for a park on the extension of Maryland Avenue. Concerns with it being a dog park, given the proximity to the unpredictability of 355 and the drivers along 355. I think it's similar to what the mayor said, which is a serious concern along any of these being the biggest concern with the parks is having any park without a strong physical barrier creates a great amount of unease. I know that this was an idea that had been floated for another property in the city further down on Rockville Pike. There is acceptance of a park, and a lot of people did not accept the idea of a park because it was so close to Rockville Pike and with no physical barrier. And I think that that's something that I think about. Is my understanding that Promenade Park, that is no longer going to be zoned park, correct? Or is that remaining as zoned for park space?
So the land use designation is not necessarily what the actual zone is. So we would propose giving it that land use designation. I don't recall off the top of my head how it's actually zoned. I don't think it actually is zoned park, but I would need to look into that.
Yeah, I feel like at some point when I looked it up, because I was giggling to myself, I was like, that was a park, really? I don't know if
Promenading park.
It's a promenading park on concrete.
So one item just to add that Mr. Barker just told me, we do not have a park zone in our zoning
that's right,
ordinance.
that got
So it is not zoned park because there is not a park zone.
Okay, cool. So we'll just call it the promenade, however we want to call it. And also, too, we may be looking at park opportunities around, pedestrian bridges and stuff in the future. So who knows? But anyway, that's my biggest comments and concerns, both for dogs at a dog park or kids in an active park. I would feel very uncomfortable in general, but definitely would need a strong physical barrier once we got to the point of design.
I'm glad you mentioned Promenade Park. We did a walking tour as we acknowledged in Walktober, and we heard from several pedestrians who commented about the Promenade Park and pedestrian. Right before you get to the pedestrian bridge, the lights are out. I know that the project is, going to take a number of years to develop, but we still need to make sure it's safe, particularly at night for people who are walking home from the metro. So I just wanted to flag that as a short-term issue. to see if staff can look into that safety issue.
Madam Mayor, this is Craig. That is actively being worked on right now. The owner of the just bought building is responsible for that lighting. They can't find a circuit. They're going to put some temporary lighting in there.
Thank you. That's fantastic to hear.
If I could add, Promenade Park is actually right of way. It stands over Truck Street below it. So while we consider a park above hand, it's actually right of way below ground. And to the question on park on Maryland Avenue across from 414, 416, there are planned fences around the dog parks area there, and it fronts to Maryland Avenue with the buildings between it to 355. So there is a bit of an initial design done with fences.
Got it. Thank you. And also, just to flag, I think Promenade Park, not all of it is ours, right? There's a mixture of ownership there.
Yeah, where the lines are a little bit funky. So we have some actions within, I think it's the focus areas section that specifically say to those owners to the north and to the south that this is the area that we want to activate, that we want to make sure when you're providing that required open space and public use space that we're building off of that right of way that the city has control over.
Excellent. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, there is right of way, plus there is a public access easement on the 255 property. So the entirety is either right of way or public access easement.
Excellent. I know, isn't part of it also the north and south owner? I know we have easements, but there is some ownership that we were told that 51 Monroe and 255 own. Is that
Yes,
right?
I believe so.
255 owns piece, but we have a public access easement over their piece. The other part of it, they do not own.
Okay. So we can make any decisions we want. All right, I'll leave it there. You guys can tell us. I think we're good on this section. Dr. Miles, are you good with this? I want to make sure you have a chance to speak. Okay, thank you. We're ready for your next question.
All right, and this is our last set of questions. Staff proposed changes. So in your staff report, you have a rationale for each of these edits that staff would like to see made. We obviously already spoke about that last one, which is the new public park along Maryland Avenue. So at this point, we are looking for some direction from the body on if you're comfortable with staff making those edits.
Thank you. Can you just keep the slide up so we can just have them handy? And what was the purpose of removing the farmer's market?
We had conversations with our recreation and parks folks, and they looked at the geometry of the site a little bit more closely and said that they wouldn't be able to with the width of the site and the sizes that they need for their vendors to access.
Okay. And then you have specific numbers for some housing projects in here, but not some of the ones that we know. So in addition to doing the unit counts on 255, can you look at the other housing projects as well? I wrote down 414, 416, and 41 Maryland, but I know you put some number for 41 Maryland, but I think there's an updated, and then 414, 416.
We can absolutely do that.
Okay. I have a couple of other edit questions to ask you about. But before I do that, is everyone okay with these? I'm looking to see that everyone seems okay. Dr. Miles, I see you're good too. Okay, perfect. There's some really good pieces here about, there's, first of all, the Rockville Town Center Master Plan goes into a lot of things, transportation, et cetera. I had a question about transportation as it relates to seniors. So I often hear that residences on the lane was one example, and I've heard it also for Boulevard 44 that like residents have said it would have been nice to have a place where the senior bus can pick us up. So I don't know if that's something you've heard or if that's something to think about in design, but just to consider for the Town Center Master Plan, like there are services like that that pick up people with disabilities as well as seniors. And can we think about, as we look at design, how to make that very easy for them? I know that you did something on Beale Avenue that has like a nice, a bus platform? But I just wanted to flag that as Town Center is very diverse, and so we need to think about our audiences and build out for it. I'm going to go back to page 412, just on the land acknowledgement. I do know that we have some mention of Indigenous people, but I just felt like that language could be strengthened on that piece. I do appreciate the inclusion of the deleterious effect of urban renewal on BIPOC communities, particularly Black communities in Rockville. So thank you for doing that. On page 423, the vision of the Rockville Town Center Master Plan seems to be missing that the town center is a regional hub for economic activity as well. So I see my colleague shaking his head, but it seems like that is missing. So I just wanted to flag it. Okay, I'm not seeing any nays, but.
Presentation went away.
Do you want the presentation back?
I had a question about 8.1.
Okay, I'll pause so you can go back to it. Do you want to ask your question, Councilman Valeri?
Yeah, just super quickly. I was looking at it, I was like, oh, it's gone now. What exactly was the clarification? And I apologize if I missed it. The clarification that you were looking at making on 8.1.3?
Yeah, so the intent of that action was in Montgomery County, there are impact fees that all market rate units have to pay. MPDUs are exempted from them. So if I'm building a building that has 5 MPDUs and 15 market rate units, I would not pay that impact fee on those 5 MPDUs, but I would pay it for those 15 market rate units within my building. The intent of this action, Montgomery County currently has, if 25% of a project is an MPDU or other deed restricted, nothing pays impact fees. So if, it's a 100 unit building, but 25 of those are MPDUs, I don't pay impact fees on that additional 75%. The intent of this action is to lower that threshold within town center and bring it down to 18%. So if 18% of any development is MPDUs or other deed restricted, then nothing has to pay impact fees. As it's written, it does not read like that. It reads as if MPDUs are currently paying impact fees and this is going to make them not. That's not the intent. So we think that needs to be clarified to drive home what's actually the current status and what we're proposing it to be.
No, that makes sense. Thank you.
Isn't that a policy question for us, is if we want to align with the 20% versus the 18?
100%.
So I don't know, I kind of like the 20%. I kind of like the 20%. That's just me. I also know that, just if you can refresh my memory, when the residences on the lane came through, when people do like senior housing like that, that also reduces the impact
I believe
tax.
so. I believe
I
because
think
that's
building
income
did not
restricted.
pay impact tax because they did so much, but they developed 100 units to get that. So I don't know. I kind of like the 20%, but I would like to see what my colleagues say. Councilman Valeri.
I mean, if we're going to talk about it, I kind of like it as a possible policy for the entire city and not just town center. Am I talking crazy talk?
I'm open to that. I'll just say that I want to make sure that it doesn't remove impact taxes do significantly provide transportation safety.
Correct.
Money. So.
But it just might no, and I hear that, but it might be an interesting conversation beyond this planning area.
I'm open to that. I just want to make sure that we have some data and pilots to not to use the word pilot like in the other phrase, but to be able to make sure that it doesn't hit our finances too much. Do you have comments on the 18 versus 20? Anyone else want to comment on that? Or do you want more time to think about it?
I'm good with 20.
He's good with 20. How about you guys? 20. 1, 2, 3. Okay, all right. Did you have another comment? Councilmember Shaw. Okay, go ahead. I'll hold on mine. Go ahead. And then I see Councilman Van Grack may have something to say.
Could you share how many developers there are, multifamily housing developers, there are in town center? Because I think there's like a very small number.
Who actively have products within town center?
Yeah.
I need to add that in my mind here.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, the only reason
We can come back to you with that. My
Okay.
guess is it's in the 5 to 7
Okay.
range.
Yeah, because I think there's, I think that can cause some issues with like rent and increasing supply if there's just a small number of developers there. The other thing I was going to ask, for MPDUs, are there some type of alternative compliance options? Like if, for example, there's a building that has more than 50 units and a developer may choose to put the MPDU units off-site somewhere, is there like an alternative compliance option?
I am not aware of any. We can coordinate with our housing folks.
Because I think there is a property in Town Center that has done that.
You mean Brightview?
No, there's another property that
I think what you're thinking of is the Ansel and Boulevard 44. Is that the projects?
Yeah,
So
for
all,
the residents.
or all of that was developed as one planned development and considered one project. So I believe that's how that came to be, is because it was all approved as one big project rather than this building is approved separately than that building.
That's what I understand as well. So I think they negotiated to help HOC. What happens is a lot of people were in the Town Center apartments. They negotiated with HOC to create that whole additional residential lane for HOC and then kind of gave it over, transferred over.
My concern around that type of procedure is that it doesn't fully take in the benefit of being inclusive. There are some units that may not be able to access some of the amenities. Also, as we know, there's tons of benefits when there's a mix of social economic status within one community. And so my concern is just applying that type of procedure in other areas in Town Center as we're increasing affordable housing. The other thing I was, just a comment. So as much as I appreciate the land acknowledgement, it does talk about the displacement, particularly of Black families in urban renewal. And it says clearly in that land acknowledgement that we are going to take some lessons and apply that. So it's disappointing to hear that there's nothing on displacement within the plan.
Do you want to comment on that, or is just listening? Okay. 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 I just have a few more. And Councilmember Van Grack, I know you had a comment.
Oh,
as well.
it might be something that you're getting to, and I apologize if it was just a note with regard to the schools.
Yes.
Yes.
It's on my list. Go for it.
Yeah,
Take
okay,
up my list.
it's just within the schools, there's 2 other elementary schools
Yes.
within the Richard Montgomery cluster.
So we think we need to change the title of that because it's not the entire cluster. Those are the schools that if you are residing within Town Center, your child could be zoned to.
Even College Gardens, I guess, because
There's
of
a
Ivy League
very
Lane.
small portion of the northern part of the planning
Yeah,
area.
and then Bayard Rustin.
Is the southern part largely along Blandford?
Yeah.
In those areas.
So I think the language says cluster.
Correct.
Versus
That needs to be corrected.
within this planning area.
Yep.
Councilmember Valeri.
But it's specifically under the adequate public facilities section, correct?
So
if we're
yeah,
talking
so-
about, and I think I mentioned this in the email, if we're, and I might have said it this morning, I don't know, time has no meaning. If we're talking about impact to adequate public facilities, we do have to look at the entire cluster regardless of where people are zoned. Because any adjustment in the elementary schools has a trickle up-down effect to enrollment in the middle school and the high school. So especially if any of the elementary schools have a huge multifamily building coming online and people moving in, that is going to, we're not going to get anywhere close to the M word anytime soon. But I think that in the Folsom, I think it makes sense to include it all together.
Oh, I see.
What? The M word. I know. I'm not saying it because it's not happening.
It's not happening. But I
It's
will
not
say There is a $1.2 or $3 million boundary study that was just supported by Board of Education's having that discussion. We don't really know what the boundaries are going to be after 2027.
Yeah, they shift.
So I don't think there's a challenge to include the other schools because you don't know.
True.
They might shake everything up. We don't know yet. I just had some comments on the demographic data. I don't know if people, I didn't like the word white collar jobs versus blue collar jobs. It just has a charge with those words. Can we just use the incomes? I think that's better. I think that's very old school, and there's just a lot of charge to those words. So I would prefer that. The chart that lists race and ethnicity shows race in the chart, but does not show ethnicity in the chart. Can that be changed? And particularly Latinos not included in a chart.
Yep.
Okay. So 467 on page 467 doesn't really mention in detail like as you're talking about wayfinding, we wanted to change all the banners around town center, the banners that are on those poles. That was part of our wayfinding discussion. I didn't see that in here. And also including the Rockville Town Center on the bridge as part of our wayfinding. I just want to put that in writing. That's something we all agree to, and we're trying to move towards that direction. I have other minor comments, but I'll leave those for future work sessions. Is there anything else that anyone would like to raise? Mr. City Manager, Jeff Mihalik, I know you talked about the next steps with some of the work sessions coming up. Can you please outline those for us?
You bet. Thank you, Mayor. So we were the fortunate recipient of a lot of comments from y'all tonight and a request for a lot of additional information. We know we can't turn that all around between now and Friday. So my recommendation is that we actually have 2 work sessions, one on December 16th and another on January 6th, because we're just not going to be able to get it all done. And we're not in a position either to tell you what elements we'll bring next week and what elements we'll bring on January 6th. You're just going to have to give us a little bit of grace in that space. We'll do the best we can. We'll try to load up as much as we can on the 16th, and whatever we need more time on, we'll put on the 6th. So that's going to be my recommendation too. And if it's okay, I'd change the 6-month planning calendar to reflect that.
I think that sounds good to me. Yep, seeing thumbs up from everybody or nods or no disagreement. I had one other comment that I just looked at, an economic development session. I know Ready has restarted some of the meetings among owners to at least talk about what each other's doing. I don't know if that's fully in there, but I just wanted to acknowledge that there's a lot of like, joltiness, right? There needs to be more cohesion in general for the placemaking and support. So I just wanted to flag that. And then also for cohesion, I know we talked about owners, but also residents should be able to be gathered. I would love to see that we're updating or engaging with town center residents more regularly. I know that will be part of Rockville Engage, but I think that should be part of this plan too. This is, in addition to a regional hub, it is a neighborhood for many people. And there were some comments on impacts here on like why things are the way they are. It doesn't mention the impact of hybrid work. And I hear that from businesses all the time, that while it's great, it's also, they're not getting the same business foot traffic that they used to get. So I thought that was a missing from that section on economic development. That's it for now. Thank you all very much. I know there's a lot to absorb. If you have any questions on or want clarifications from us, please let us know. But otherwise, we'll look forward to our next 2 work sessions and the data that we requested.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. We're now moving on to our mock agenda. I know that we made some changes to mock agenda. Would you like to describe those changes, Mr. Mihalik?
Certainly happy to. So we are taking off the short-term rental work session. We're going to put that under unassigned, and we're adding a work session for Town Center Master Plan. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, colleagues, old new business. Councilmember Valeri.
I don't know if this would fall under this, but I did raise the idea of getting a regular calendar year briefing on the state of the real estate market and the trend lines, if that could be facilitated or conducted by Ready in conjunction with someone. But especially going through the town center master plan, I found myself going, I don't really know. What are the forecasted trends and what are the things that we might need to account for going forward? So I just put that out there to my colleagues. I mentioned it this morning. And if it's something that folks are in agreement with, I'm not thinking any sort of in-depth session, but just kind of a briefing to get us all in the same data mindset when we look at any future investments.
I will say I support that. I had put in all of your mailboxes, this was several months ago, a market rate study that I had gotten through a Ready meeting. And I think that the mayor and council would benefit from being able to ask questions on something like that. So I know that would be an ask for Ready. Is anyone against this? Are you okay with that? Councilmember Fulton.
I'm not against it, but I just want to, like, I feel like it's a good idea. We should pursue and have conversations and see what the city manager thinks is best rather. So I'm not against it, but I also don't want to be like straw polling and giving a vote to do an annual thing on the spot right here, if that's where we're headed.
Well, I think if he's going to ask Ready to potentially organize a briefing, it could either be an email that they just send us, or if we want to have briefing and exchange of questions and answer. Now, we don't have to commit to annual, but that's the kind of thing of like, do you have an appetite to have a work session or special presentation? Okay, all right. And then we can decide the frequency if we like it or not. Maybe we just get the next set that's in writing, but all right, so we're okay with at least trying once. I have a question about the next meeting. I sent in an email and I apologize, it was the evening, and I meant to mention an LPT. RHE has the issue with some of the financing documents for Scarborough. Does that need to come on December 16th or not?
I don't believe so, but let me circle back. I did see the email. I just need a little bit more time.
Okay. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All right.
Second.
Councilmember Jackson, Councilmember Valeri, thank you. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you.